I once took a trek on the Appalachian Trail in Pennsylvania, which is the longest hiking-only trail in the world. I went it alone just for fun. I went late in the fall though, so it was cold and there weren't many other people hiking. In fact, I think I only ran into like 2 other people going the opposite way. The part of the trail I was on was in thick forest, and it was definitely a scenic walk. The trail ran alongside a small river, and nothing could be heard but the sound of the flowing river and the early morning birds chirping. It was time for me to sit down and take a break, so I found a big rock sitting aside the river and sat down on it. I took a sip of my Gatorade, and then I could swear I was hearing a baby's cries coming from the distance. It was coming from further down the trail in the direction I was walking. Of course, I had to get up and follow the sound of it, because of that off chance that a baby was stranded in the woods alone. As I walked further down the trail though, it seemed like the baby's cries stayed the same distance away. This went on for like half a minute of walking fast before I gave up, and assumed it was somebody with a baby walking down the trail. I sat down on another rock I found on the side of the trail by the river. Eventually the crying seemed to just stop. Like it didn't fade away really, it just stopped abruptly. I sat on that rock for 5 minutes, just taking in the nature and taking a few videos on my phone. That's when I heard footsteps approaching nearby. Expecting to see another hiker walking the trail, I saw some frantic-looking woman hurrying over to me. She came so fast and so close that it actually scared me. She stopped uncomfortably close to my face and started screaming at me, "Have you seen my baby?" I calmly told her I heard a baby crying not too long ago, and told her to follow me. We walked quickly down the trail in the direction I was chasing the sounds of the baby earlier. I looked back every few seconds to make sure she was keeping up with me. Eventually I summoned up the nerve to ask her how on earth she lost her baby, but she didn't answer. So I turned around again and stopped when I saw she was gone. And the weird thing, she was right on my tail just 10 seconds ago. I screamed out for her a few times, but the only sounds around me were the sounds of the birds chirping and the river. I figured even if she trailed off away from me, I would at least still be able to see her in the distance. I stood there for a long time deciding what to do next. Just move on with my life and continue the trail, or walk back and try to find this woman. I did one more quick 180-degree scan of the area we just came from, and what I saw next may not sound very disturbing, but it was disturbing to me in that very spot. I saw the woman standing across the river, arms hanging lifelessly at her sides, and she was looking at me. Not saying anything, not moving a muscle, blank expression. Just standing like a statue, watching me. I had made up my decision right there, and that was to move the hell on with my life right there. I walked as fast as I could away from there until my calves hurt from walking so fast for so long. Eventually, I made it back to my car after looping around another trail. I cut the hike short after what happened. I was truly unsettled by it and even started to question my sanity. Like, did that actually even happen? It seemed so unreal, and yet, at the same time, it felt real in the sense that I lived it. I just want to know if anyone else who hiked the Appalachian Trail had any kind of freakish experiences like this. I have a preserve by my house since we live in a highly populated suburban area and there isn't much green. It's a huge preserve with miles and miles worth of biking and hiking trails. So long story short, one night in 2016 at like 11 at night, I decided to go for a run. I'm weird in the sense that I like to avoid people when I go for runs. That's just how I am. I held my phone with a tight grip with the flashlight on and started my run at the edge of the preserve onto the dirt hiking trail. I felt I had more energy running at night too. It was weird, I don't know how to describe it. There were no lights at all, it was all just nature. There was also a dead body that came up in the previous week in the preserve, but I didn't really let that concern me too much since I live in one of the safest neighborhoods in the state. It was also a weeknight, so there was literally no one else in this preserve but me. Well, that's at least what I thought. I got tired after about 10 minutes of running. Yeah, I used to be out of shape. I had to catch my breath, so the first bench I found, I sat down on. I have to admit, it was creepy as hell being in a pitch black preserve like that all alone. It feels the same as being alone in the middle of a forest. There were weird sounds coming from all around, and to be quite honest with you, it was scaring me. Of course, most of them were animals, so when I heard leaves and sticks crunching nearby, I assumed it was a raccoon or fox or something. But anyone's worst nightmare came true when I noticed something tall hiding behind one of the trees. I couldn't quite tell what it was because an iPhone's flashlight is only so bright. I stood up and walked a little closer, and I was kind of doing a crouch walk because for some reason I thought that would make me more low-key. I got close enough to where I saw a hand wrapped around one of the trees. The hand was in a white glove though. I felt like my heart sank, like I was suddenly in a life or death situation before I could even see who was behind that tree. Then they finally decided to reveal themselves. Someone dressed as a clown stepped into the range of my flashlight. I wanted to wait until now to mention this was back during the clown epidemic in 2016. From what I could see in the little light I had, this person went all out with his clown costume, from the makeup right down to the clown shoes. The most disturbing part was the bat with a large foot-long spike wedged through it that he was holding. His head was angled down to give a more menacing, terrifying look, and he walked very slowly towards me. I had only one option, and that was to run as fast as I could, even though I was already so tired. I didn't run on the trail. Instead, I ran into the woods until I felt like I was going to puke. Then I shut off the flashlight and crouched down behind a tree. I heard running zoom past me maybe 10 feet away. When the footsteps faded away into the distance, I ran back to the trail and ran all the way back the way I came. And I actually puked by the time I made it to the street just from running so much. I didn't mention it before, but everyone figured that the dead body found the week before was linked to the clown epidemic. It should go without saying I stayed away from the preserve for a while, and I definitely never went in there past dark ever again. I went on a solo camping trip to the woods a few miles from my house. After setting up camp and eating, I took a half-hour nap in my tent and went for a hike. It was a normal hike in a rather quiet forest, until I thought I could hear footsteps nearby. I could have just chalked them up to being the footsteps of an animal, but they kind of sounded human-like, if that makes sense. Considering how deep into the woods I was and how far from any real urbanization I was, it would definitely be odd to cross paths with another person there. I didn't go looking around for anyone though, I just continued with my hike. When I got back to my tent, the first thing that I noticed was that the zipper to my tent was undone and the door flap was open. Right away, my heart was racing at the thought of someone having been in my tent. I checked to make sure that nobody was still in there first, and then went inside to see that my bag had been gone through. Surprisingly, nothing was taken though. I contemplated packing up and moving spots, but I figured it was pointless. Whoever came already scoped out the place and left, therefore they wouldn't have a reason to come back. Fast forward to that night when I finally got in my tent to go to sleep. A few minutes after getting in my sleeping bag, I heard a noise. The first time I heard it, I had no idea what it could be, but the second time I heard it, it sounded like a staticky breathing sound. I sat up and looked around my tent, and at that point it went silent. So after sitting up with my heart racing for a decent while, I laid back down and tried to move past it. But after not even having my eyes closed for 10 seconds, I heard it again. Some kind of grainy, staticky breathing noise. I started digging through my bag and found something I knew for certain I didn't bring with me. I pulled out a huge, archaic-looking walkie-talkie type thing, and the static was emanating from that. I instantly associated it with the footsteps and whoever searched my tent. But all I was thinking was, why would they put that there? Just then the static stopped and there was a breathing sound once more coming from the big walkie-talkie type thing. And then in a deep, almost unintelligible whisper, I heard the words, "I'm outside your tent." It's crazy how in just a couple seconds your whole world can change, and how your whole body can become overcome with fear. I frantically pressed buttons on the oversized walkie-talkie until it finally seemed to turn off. Then, I heard something hit the ground outside, something heavy, I had a choice. Do I stand ground and protect my belongings and myself, or do I make a straight dash for the pickup truck? When I heard something else hit the ground right outside the tent, I chose the latter and made a run for my pickup. I left behind my tent, my sleeping bag, and other equipment, but in reality none of that stuff really mattered when my life was potentially on the line. For all I know, it was some kind of trap to just get me to leave all my stuff behind for them to take. Or it could have genuinely been someone who intended on harming me.
Ever since I can remember, we've always had one of those old vintage Parker Brother Ouija boards sitting in our closet collecting dust. When I was a kid, I always wondered what it was. From the box, it seemed like a horrible board game, until one day I found out what a Ouija board really is, and immediately dug it out of the closet. I insisted on my brother trying it out with me, and eventually got him to play along. We put our hands on the planchette, and I began asking the typical cliché questions like, "Is there anybody there?" and "Can you answer me?" Other than my brother jokingly moving the planchette around to imitate an answer from some kind of entity, there was no real response. After getting bored, we put the game back in the box. I did a little research that night to find out how to make Ouija boards work. Many people said online that the most ideal environment when using a Ouija board is in a dark room only lit by candles. So when my parents weren't home, I managed to gather like 6 or 7 candles and convinced my brother to try it one more time. I lit the candles and set them around the table in the dining room with all the lights out. We tried one more time. I asked again if there was anybody there. The planchette began to move. I told my brother to stop moving it, but he swore he wasn't. I told him to move his hand away, and he did. It kept moving. My brother thought I was messing with him, but I didn't pay attention. The planchette landed on the word yes. I was only 9, so I was legitimately shitting myself. My older brother had to take over. He asked the question, "Are you a good spirit?" There was a 5-second pause before my brother's hand moved along with the planchette to the word no. We both looked at each other, and at this point I ran to my room and shut the door behind me, but he continued on with the so-called game. I heard his muffled voice come from down in the dining room, when all of a sudden I heard him screaming at the top of his lungs. I ran back downstairs to see what was wrong. He was holding up his shirt, revealing a small open wound that almost looked like a claw mark. He told me to set the fireplace immediately, and I obeyed. He threw the thing in the fireplace and told me to never speak of what happened to anybody. We have never used a Ouija board since. I got a call from my cousin who said that he, his brother, his dad, and his best friend were using a Ouija board in their basement. Prior to starting, they took a large porcelain doll out of the room because it was creepy, and placed it in the adjacent room face down on a pile of towels. My cousin took a short break because the board was just spouting nonsense and he had to go to the bathroom. His dad and brother and friends started asking the board questions without him. One of the questions was, who is in the other room? It just started spouting random numbers, and when my cousin came back into the room, his brother said that it wasn't working, that they were going to put it away, and he showed him the answer to the last question he asked, and he said, "Dude, that's my social security number." Then they started to talk to whatever started spewing answers out. It told my cousin he would die in the Air Force. At this point, they tell the entity they're communicating with to prove itself. It then spelled out the word doll, and they immediately got a bad feeling. They opened the door to check on the porcelain doll they had laid in the other room, and when they opened the door, the doll was standing up right in front of the door, staring at them. Everyone freaked out and ran out of the house. His best friend burned the Ouija board, and I think he temporarily went nuts for a few months. My cousin, for some reason, then joined the Air Force, and is on a base in Europe now. I had some of my friends over one night, so we tried out the Ouija board we found in someone's garbage. It had the board and the glass piece that you hold onto. The four of us held onto the piece and asked stupid questions, just messing around. At all times, one of us were moving around the glass piece just to try and fool the others. When one of my friends went to the bathroom and the other got bored, it was just me and one of my other friends still holding onto it. I asked the board when I will die, and the piece started slowly moving to the letter T. I laughed, looking at my friend, thinking it was him, but he just told me that he thought it was me. The piece then moved to the letter O, and then M, and then back to O, and then R, and then I realized that it was spelling out the word tomorrow. My friend let go of it, and it stopped moving, so I was convinced that it was him, but he swore left and right it wasn't him. But here's where it gets horrifying. The next day, while walking my dog to the preserve, my dog's collar suddenly snaps and he was free from the leash. He darted into the road and I immediately chased after him, only to hear the horn of an oncoming car blaring and getting louder. I dove as fast as I could out of the way, just barely grazing the car with my foot as it passed. But it didn't end there. The same day, while sitting under the ceiling fan in the kitchen on full blast, I got up to get something out of the fridge, and behind me, I heard a loud crashing sound as all the glass on the table was shattered and everything fell onto the floor. The fan had fallen off the ceiling, and I was inches away from being decapitated. I really don't know if I find it to be a coincidence that the day after the Ouija board said I would die the next day, that I had two near-death experiences. All I know is I'm never touching a Ouija board again. I have never really told people about this. We had a huge closet full of old board games, and one of them happened to be a Ouija board. I always wanted to try it out, but my family was always home, and I felt weird trying it in front of them. There was this one weekend that my parents were going to the city, and my brother was going on a Boy Scout campout, so I would have the whole house to myself for a weekend. It might have been pathetic that I was more excited to try out a Ouija board than to party with friends while the house was empty. The weather was terrible, windy and rainy, but I felt that a rainy night would actually make it more ritualistic. Around midnight, I set up the board in my dining room and dimmed the lights. I asked a bunch of questions that generated no answers, so I eventually put the board away and went to bed. I woke up in the middle of the night to hear a creaking noise downstairs by the front door. At first I thought nothing of it, but then I heard it again, and it was closer this time, closer to the stairs. I sat up now. At this point I was getting concerned. Another creaking sound, this time from one of the stairs. I was sure somebody was in my house. This was before cell phones were mainstream, so calling the police wasn't even an option. The creaking sounds were getting closer until they were right outside my door, and then they just stopped. It felt like hours while I laid there clutching my covers, waiting for something to happen. A huge strike of lightning momentarily lit up my bedroom, and I swore I could see some kind of black limb-type object wrapped around the open door. I tried to hold my breath to be as quiet as possible, but what happened next was the worst part. My door suddenly slammed shut, and I couldn't help but let out a shriek. By now I was completely under my covers, shaking and crying and wanting to scream. All the windows in the house were closed, so there was no draft. I just knew something was going to happen. But nothing happened. I sat under my covers for hours, thinking somebody or something was in the room with me. When the sun started to rise, I finally snuck a peek out of my covers. My room was just as empty as before. I somehow found the courage to leave my bedroom and search for any signs of a break-in. Everything looked normal though. No broken windows or unlocked doors. I then spotted the Ouija board on the table again. I have always been kind of superstitious, so I immediately linked the happenings to the Ouija board. I chucked the damn thing in the outside trash can and brought it out front to the curb. Since then, nothing has happened, and I didn't tell anybody about it. You wouldn't understand unless you were in that kind of situation. Then you would agree that nobody would believe a word you say. Nobody really knows except for the people that read my story online. I know for a fact that those events were linked to the Ouija board. I can tell you from personal experience that trying a Ouija board is a huge mistake. It was the summer of 2013. My friend had a vintage Ouija board that was allegedly worth a decent amount of money. My friend agreed to trade it with me for a video game that I never played, so I happily made the trade. I tried using it alone, but it proved to be just a scam. I didn't really expect it to work. I mainly got it just for the money to be made off of it. I threw the stupid thing on the floor of my living room and forgot about it. Everything was going normal until the next morning. I woke up and found that the 2 plants I had sitting on my coffee table had been knocked over, and the Ouija board was sitting on the table. I didn't remember putting it there, nor did I understand how the plants could have fallen over. Wind was definitely not an answer. I wondered if it was possible that I had sleepwalked, or maybe I was half awake and walked down to get a glass of water and bumped into them or something. I moved everything back in place, but the carpet already had dirt stains on it. I brought the Ouija board box up to my room and tossed it on the floor. Things got bad that night. While laying awake in the dark, I was disturbed by the sound of a muffled click. I looked up, not sure what it was, and then I saw through the cracks of my closet door that my closet light was on. I had no idea how it could have turned on, but I got up and opened the closet door anyway. There was nobody in there, but that hadn't even crossed my mind. I turned the light off and jumped back into bed. Probably 10 minutes later, I heard the same clicking sound. Naturally, I looked to the closet and felt my heart sink a little. The closet light was on again. A mix of confusion and fear started building up inside of me. I once again turned off the light and cautiously got back in my bed. I found myself waiting for the closet light to click on again. But what happened instead was much worse. Instead of the closet light turning on, the whole room suddenly filled with light as I heard the main light switch flick on. I had seen enough and was out the door within seconds. I quickly pieced things together and chucked that old Ouija board in the closest dumpster. Nothing weird ever happened after that.
The summer of 2007, when I was 10 years old, the family and I had a trip to Disneyland planned. Our flight was booked for midnight on a Tuesday to save money, and my mom figured my sisters and I would sleep through the flight. My sisters were 8 and 5 at the time. The gatehouse was for the most part empty as we waited for our flight. My mom went to go to the bathroom with my youngest sister, and a minute later my dad told me to wait there and watch my other sister while he went to get a last-minute bite to eat at the cafe as a middle-aged woman came and sat next to us. She put her hand on my back as she acted all excited to see us and asked where our parents were. I told her they would be right back. Then a middle-aged man came over as well and started acting just as bubbly and affectionate towards us as if he knew us. The man then proclaimed that he just ran into my dad at the cafe and finally introduced himself and the woman as our dad's cousins. My sister and I looked at each other and we both said hello really shyly. The man reached out his hand for my sister to grab, while the woman reached out her hand for me to grab. They told us to follow them because they wanted us to meet their kids. My sister and I naively got up, took their hands, and followed them. The two started leading us out of the gatehouse, past the cafe, down the stairs, and towards the lobby of the airport. When I realized they were leading us to the entrance of the airport, towards the parking lot, I finally asked, "Where are we going?" The woman looked at me through her thick-framed glasses, and with her cheeky smile, said their kids were outside by the car. As we walked outside into the dark parking lot, I looked at my sister and became really uncomfortable. I broke my hand free from the woman and said we wanted to go back inside, while also taking my sister's hand from the man's. I noticed the two looked at each other, their cheeky smiles both gone. The man turned quickly to us and then aggressively wrapped his arms around me as the woman did the same to my sister. They started to literally carry us closer to the parking lot as me and my sister screamed. We heard yelling in the distance from two men who turned out to be airport security. The crazed pair let us go and ran quicker than I'd ever seen anyone run, quickly disappearing into the parking lot. One of the men chased them down, or at least tried to, while the other talked with us for a bit, then led us back into the airport, back to our parents and other sister. It had only been a few minutes and my mom was already sobbing like a baby. Being that I was so young makes this a really weird and uncomfortable memory to think about. It's also weird to think that I didn't see any red flags go off when the two didn't give us their names. It was minutes before boarding my flight to North Carolina for a job interview the next day. It was on a stormy February night. Everyone was bundled up and keeping to themselves. I was sitting in the terminal room waiting for my flight to be called. It wasn't going to be a very busy flight because there weren't many people in the waiting area. Someone sat down 2 seats away from me, which wasn't too weird itself, but also was a bit annoying considering most of the seats were open. But it went from annoying to downright disturbing when I looked at him to see him weirdly staring at me. I looked away and pretended not to care, but I could tell he was still looking at me. Then he leaned over to me and whispered close to my ear that the two men sitting a row across from me were going on the same plane and were planning on kidnapping me once we landed in North Carolina. I didn't know what to say other than, "What?" The heavy man then got up and walked away. At the same time my flight was called, and I nervously boarded the plane while paying attention to the two men. They sat down ahead of me, and as I walked past them approaching my seat, they both stared me down. At that moment, I started to wonder if that man's warning were true. A few hours later, we arrived to NC, and on my way out of the plane and leaving the airport, I cautiously looked around trying to spot the two men. When I was finally outside in the dark, cold parking lot, I spotted them. The two men were peering their heads at me from around a red minivan, and I guess when they saw me looking in their direction, they hid behind the van. I walked back inside of the airport, waited half an hour, called for a taxi, waited for it to pull up front, and rode to my hotel. So many questions. I don't know who that man was who warned me. I don't know how he knew of those other two men, and I have no idea what they were planning on doing to me, if they were actually looking to kidnap me. So this happened a few months ago. I'm 26. I was at JFK Airport in New York with 5 friends. All of us were about to fly down to Florida to spend the week in a beach house. We had a few more minutes to kill in the airport before we would board our flight, and I really had to go to the bathroom all of a sudden. I was baffled to see a line out the door for the bathroom. I noticed a janitor walking by, so I asked her if there was another bathroom nearby that wouldn't be so crowded. She laughed and told me she shouldn't really be telling people, but there was another bathroom past the door she was pointing at, down a narrow flight of stairs and to the left. I thanked her because she was extremely nice and followed the direction she gave me. Sure enough, behind that door that no one would think to open was a small stairway that led down to a really poorly lit, skinny hallway. It was so narrow that if 2 people were to pass by each other, one person would have to stand against the wall to make room. I found the bathroom right away. The door was extremely heavy and hard to push. Also, the lights were on inside of the bathroom, and it was filthy in there. It was evident that nobody ever really came in there to clean. Now, this is a little embarrassing to mention, but when I go to the bathroom in public places, I always try to make sure nobody else is around to possibly hear me going. So after checking the stall to see that it was unoccupied, I went back into the hallway for a second to take a look down both directions. To the left, there was somebody standing at the end of the hall, in a dark, unlit section of the hallway. It was a disturbing sight to say the least. All I could do was awkwardly pull my head back into the bathroom and try to pretend we didn't see each other. I went into the stall and just stood there biting my fingers for a minute, dreading the thought of that door opening. And of course, it did. I saw the man's black shoes under the stall door as he walked to the stall next to mine. He shut the door, and then there was silence. No sound of the man unzipping his fly or sitting down, nothing. I realized I didn't really have to go anymore, and went to unlock the stall door. That's when I looked up and saw the man's head peering over the stall, looking at me. I nearly had a heart attack as my screams bounced off the walls of the tiny bathroom. I ran back up those damn steps and out that door, and then casually walked back over to my friends. I was breathing heavily, but nobody seemed to notice. I didn't tell anyone just because it was embarrassing, and I didn't want my friends to make fun of me in any way. I know, I guess that seems stupid now. We went on to have our Florida vacation and all had a good time. Of course, the thought of that creepy man haunted me every night that week. My wife recently took a trip to California with a few of her girlfriends. I was her ride to the airport, and I was there for her ride back from the airport as well. I waited around in the lobby for a while. Her flight ran a little behind schedule, so it was about 15 minutes late. I breathed a sigh of relief when I saw my wife Michelle and her 4 friends heading over in my direction. Michelle waved happily and ran over to give me a big hug and kiss. I said hello to all of her friends as well. Michelle suddenly started patting her pockets, and a concerned expression appeared on her face. She looked at me and told me she lost her wallet and keys. So Michelle and I, along with one of her friends who was kind enough to help out, all went back up to the terminal and looked everywhere. We asked one of the airport workers to have the plane checked for a wallet and keys. Long story short, we spent a great deal of time looking around the airport to find nothing. She insisted she had both the wallet and keys after she left the plane, though. Eventually, we had to call it quits and went home. A worker assured us that if the items came up, we would be contacted immediately. Michelle was in a sour mood the whole ride home because of it. When we got home, Michelle went up to her room, and I could hear her throw her giant bag onto the bed all the way from downstairs as I was in the kitchen about to make a quick snack for myself. That was when the scream of my wife from upstairs hit me cold in the chest. I ran to our room to see her pointing at the bathroom door. I looked at it and then the 2 closet doors across the room. They'd both been opened, and all of our personal belongings had been thrown all over the floor. Boxes opened with papers that were once in them scattered all over the floor. She stuttered out the words, "There's someone in the bathroom," to me. I felt like my heart stopped in response to those words, but I had to be the man of the house and step up. I tried the doorknob to the bathroom, but of course it was locked. Michelle left the room in a hurry, which I later found out she did to call the cops downstairs. I started ramming at the weak old door with my shoulder, and after 5 solid hits, I busted the door down. Only the bathroom was empty, and the window was jammed completely open, wide enough for someone to squeeze through. I comforted Michelle until the cops arrived, and listening to her description to the cops was bone-chilling. She had just thrown her bag onto the bed, not even having noticed the closets yet, and out of nowhere felt something brush up past her. When she turned, she saw a massively tall man walking to the bathroom, staring at her the whole time with wide eyes and a blank expression. She was only able to get a scream out after the man locked himself into the bathroom. It's safe to say he found my wife's keys and wallet and saw an easy opportunity to break into a house. We had our locks changed the next day and never saw the man again. It was early June 2017. I was taking a road trip with my 9-year-old son Tom to West Virginia to visit family. It was a long, stressful drive. My car didn't have working AC at the time, and it was an incredibly hot day, so we were a bit stressed out by the 6-hour mark. We had left later in the day, so we were still on the road by dark. I think it was around 9 p.m. when we were still on the interstate, and Tom started complaining that he needed to use the bathroom. There was already tension in the car before this, but his constant complaining brought about a slight argument between the two of us. It was about personal stuff I'd rather not share with the internet. At last, I saw a blue rest area sign zoom past us on the interstate, so I veered off into the rest area. It had a small building with 2 bathrooms, a couple vending machines, and a few benches. That was it. There were no other cars parked nearby besides some big white pickup truck. As I pulled up next to the building, Tom got out in a hurry and ran to the bathroom. I left the car on because I knew he'd be back soon. Like I said, I don't want to get into personal stuff, like why we had a bit of an argument, but it seemed we were at that stage where we weren't exchanging words anymore. I figured the rest of the ride would be silent. About a minute later, the back door opened and then shut. I wanted to say something to Tom, but I didn't know what to say, so I just stayed quiet and drove off. I noticed that the white pickup truck parked nearby was leaving as well. In fact, he was close behind me. I veered back onto the interstate and into the left lane, and the pickup truck did the same. I stepped on it a little, and so did he. He started flashing his lights, so I switched to the right lane, thinking he was nothing but an aggressive driver. But as soon as I switched to the right, so did he. He was still flashing his lights. I pulled into the right lane and started to slow down. He sped up, still in the middle lane, and when he caught up to me, he slowed down and lowered his window. I did the same, and he started yelling something to me, pointing at my car. He looked like a creepy, sketchy dude at first glance. I couldn't hear a word he was saying, so he pointed for me to pull over to the side. I told Tom to keep calm. In my head, I was saying if this guy tried to do anything funny, I would floor it. The pickup pulled up behind me on the grass, and the guy came out of his truck running to my car. I put the car back in drive as my heart was racing, ready to drive. But then he screamed, "Wait." He got to my window and said, "That's not your kid," and pointed to the back seat. As he said this, I was confused and said, "What?" He said, "That's not your kid that got in your car." Suddenly, the back right side door opened, and I turned to see someone getting out of my car, not my son Tom. I got out from the car, screaming at the tall person who seemed to be a fully grown man, but they had already disappeared into the woods. I looked at the driver of the pickup and thanked him as I suddenly panicked, thinking about what could have happened to Tom. I got back in my car, crossed the grass between the interstate, and drove back to the rest area. The guy in the pickup followed me. We got back there in like 30 seconds to find Tom waiting outside the rest area bathroom. He got back in the car, all confused. I explained everything to him, almost out of breath, as did the pickup driver. I thanked the guy one more time before he drove back to the spot he was sitting in before. Tom was so intrigued about what just happened, and I was so disturbed that we were back on good terms again. We chatted the whole rest of the way and told family about it as soon as we arrived. I never even got to see what the person who got in my car looked like. Honestly, maybe I should be happy I never turned around to look at them, because I don't know what they would have done. My girlfriend and I took a road trip to California recently. The way there was completely normal. We left home early in the morning and got to the hotel by nightfall. On our way back home, however, we left midday and a majority of our ride was in the dark. The drive was about 10 hours each way, not including stops for food. We made 2 food stops, the first after about 3 hours of driving, then one more much later and deeper into the night. We got off the freeway at like 12:30 at night and went to the nearest Wendy's for food. We got right back on the freeway after that. I ate while I drove, which my girlfriend wasn't too fond of, but I just wanted to get home sooner rather than later. Shortly after getting back on the freeway, it started to rain. My girlfriend forced me to pull over now. She didn't want me eating and driving in poor conditions. As I pulled to the side, it actually started to downpour. I finished up eating my food, and then we heard a bang sound at the window. first, I chalked it up to noises from the storm. But when I looked to my left out the window to see a figure blocking 90% of the window, along with a shriek of my girlfriend's, I nearly had a heart attack. I didn't want to roll down the window given how hard it was pouring, but over the sound of the torrential rain pounding on the car, I couldn't hear what the person was saying. I opened the door a crack and yelled out to the person, who turned out to be a woman. She was soaked already and looked disheveled and scared. She asked for a ride, and what was I going to do? Tell her no in these conditions? I told her to get in the back seat. My girlfriend gave me a look. I don't know what kind of look exactly, but it looks kind of like a "why the hell did you let her in" kind of look. I asked the woman where she was heading. She didn't answer. I caught my girlfriend giving me a look again because of this. I ignored her and turned around to look at the woman in the back seat, assuming she didn't hear me. But as creepy as it was, she was actually looking right at me with a cold, unfriendly face. I'd say it was a neutral, blank face, but something about it was just off-putting. I repeated my question, and she just shrugged her shoulders and laughed. I looked at my girlfriend, who was once again looking at me. I said out loud that I'd be dropping the woman off at the next town we crossed. I guess I was announcing that to both my girlfriends and the woman. As we got back onto the barren highway, there was a sudden ear-piercing screaming sound coming from right behind me, and the woman sitting behind me suddenly wrapped her arms around my throat. I slammed on the brakes as I was struggling to breathe, almost sliding into the divider. My girlfriend, quote, slashed at the woman's face with her long nails. The screaming turned from a deranged, angry kind of screaming to screams of pain and agony. I got out of the car as she had her hands pressed up against her face in agony. I then opened the back door, grabbed the woman with both hands, and literally threw her out of the car into the rain. She started begging, "Please, please," over and over as I looked down at her. But that's all she said. She cried as she kept saying the word "please." I ignored her and got back into my car and locked it. As I put the car in drive, there were bangs at the window as the woman started screaming again. Her screams once again sounded like the screams of a deranged mental asylum patient. I drove away casually as she was no longer a real threat, or at least not that I knew of. My girlfriend quickly got on the phone with the police and warned them of some suspicious, unstable woman lurking around the highway. We didn't stop again though. We went straight home from there, obviously a bit shaken up and whatnot, but I didn't want to be thinking about that incident for any longer than I had to. It was 2010. I was driving my Ford F-150 from my home in Pennsylvania to Georgia. I had family in the countryside of Georgia who I'd be spending the week with. It was going to be a drive of around 14 hours, and I planned on doing it all in one day. I got on the road at 10 a.m. I stopped once for lunch at some deli, and then 4 hours later I stopped at a rest area to eat the turkey sandwiches I packed in the cooler. After that, I didn't intend on making any other stops, besides for gas one more time, of course. At about 11:30 p.m., I had just filled up the tank one more time, and now I had an ETA of about 12:30. I was admittedly getting very tired now. I didn't think to get coffee at the gas station for some reason. The route the GPS was taking me down from the gas station seemed a little odd. I wasn't on the highway anymore. It was just taking me down some country-ass side roads. My truck is high up, so I got a good view of everything, and I also had a light bar installed, which really helped in lighting up these pitch-black roads. I was so tired, and I knew I shouldn't have been driving anymore, but I was so close to my cousin's house that I had to keep going. I came to a stop sign and made a left turn off some quiet road onto an even quieter road. The speed limit on this road was 45 though, which was good. This road was empty of any kinds of buildings or houses. It was just woodland on either side. I was going like 55 to 60 miles per hour, blazing down this road since it really seemed like no other cars would be on this type of road at this hour. Then suddenly I saw like 4 shiny objects coming up fast in the road ahead of me. I slammed on the brakes, and as I got closer, I figured out what they were. They were traffic drums, like those big cylinder traffic cones. My truck managed to come to a halt before I rammed into the drums. I got out of my truck with my baseball bat, confused as hell. I went over to the traffic drums, and realized there was something else behind the traffic drums. It was a spike trap, like the kind police use. I didn't know what to think. Was there some kind of police activity going on? Or did somebody set this up as a trap? I cautiously looked all around me as I inched back to my truck. Then I heard someone scream help. It came from the woods on the left side of the road. There was no way I was about to go into those woods. The most I was willing to do was call out, "What's wrong?" No answer. I walked to the edge of the road and looked into the forest. The only reason I could see anything was because of the lights from my truck. In the corner of my eye, I spotted him. Without looking directly at him, I saw someone crouched down behind a couple bushes. I didn't run, I just casually walked back to my car. When I got in and shut the door, I looked to my left to see two silhouettes by the edge of the woods on the side of the road, walking towards my truck. I drove the truck to the right side of the road onto the dirt and past the spike trap. I don't think they anticipated me actually going around, but when I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw at least 3 silhouettes standing by the traffic drums, lit up only briefly by the taillights of my truck. A few seconds later, they were gone out of my vision and out of my life forever. This was not something I would have ever expected to happen to me. Nevertheless, I'm glad I made it out alive. When my grandparents passed away, instead of my parents selling her house, they just let me live in it instead since I was of moving out age anyway. I just had to pay the taxes and monthly expenses. At first I really enjoyed living alone, given that I could have whoever I wanted over whenever I wanted. But it quickly got lonely being alone, so I got myself a 2-year-old German Shepherd dog named Rocky. He was named after Rocky Balboa. Rocky's a very calm and gentle German Shepherd. He hardly ever barks, only when he feels threatened or if he's playing with another dog. I bought him a doggy bed the day after I adopted him and put it next to my bed. After I got Rocky, I always left the bedroom door open so that he could go get water at night if he were thirsty. One night soon after I adopted Rocky, I woke up to his barking coming from outside my room and down the hallway. I dizzily got out of bed to check what the hell he was barking at. I rubbed my eyes as I walked down the hallway, and when I opened them, I saw Rocky maniacally barking and clawing at the basement door. I didn't know what to do. Usually I'd call my dad to deal with something like this, but now it was on me, and I was terrified. I had to ask myself if I wanted Rocky to go down there with me, and I quickly realized there was no chance of me going down there alone. I opened the door ever so lightly, but it was enough for Rocky to push it open with his nose and run down the stairs. I flipped on the lights and followed close behind. Rocky was silent now, which I found a bit concerning. I looked around for him, calling his name, and then I saw him standing still, with his tail between his legs, looking up at something in an opposite corner of the room that was blocked by a wall. Rocky looked at me and his tail slightly raised as I approached him. I could now see what he was looking at. It was a closet door. Rocky's apparent bout of confidence was obviously short-lived, and he seemed to be back to his calm and timid self. All that was passing through my mind at that moment was, do I dare open this closet door right now? And who or what could be in there? I didn't know Rocky too well just yet, but I had a feeling he wouldn't attack whoever or whatever was in there. I'm still not sure whether I made the right move or not, but instead of opening that closet door, I took Rocky by the collar and walked with him back upstairs. He kept looking back at the corner of the basement until we got to the stairs. I shut the basement door and then dragged him back to my bedroom and shut the bedroom door. Then I went to the kitchen to call my dad. I had to call 3 times before he finally picked up in a groggy voice. I explained the situation and asked him what I should do. He said I should go back down there with a huge knife or some kind of weapon and see what's in the closet. I told him I was too scared to, and somewhere deeper into that conversation with my dad, I realized the basement door was open. I put the phone down for a second to listen to what I thought were footsteps, and I was right. Loud and clear were footsteps heading towards the front door. I ran to my bedroom and told my dad. He told me to hang up the phone and call the cops, and so I did. By the time the cops showed up, though, whoever was in the house was obviously gone already. Unfortunately, I left a large amount of cash down there by the bar. All of it was gone. The basement window was wide open, so we found the method of entry pretty quickly. Just turned out to be a break-in burglary when I happened to be home. This story took place just 2 weeks ago. I've always had a fear of basements since I was a kid. Now that I'm 18, my fear is obviously subdued a little bit, but I still will glance over my shoulder to any noise I may hear behind me. And I might get that slight butterfly in my stomach feeling when I'm alone. Well, on this cold Friday night, I was home alone, and since our biggest TV is in the basement, that's where I'd usually chill, especially to play video games. I was playing Fortnite with my friends, some crazy popular first-person shooter game. I had headphones in and I was really invested in the game. Yet even over the loud sound effects through the headphones, I knew I heard something come from behind me, like a thump. I took off the headphones and examined the back of the basement. Now our basement is huge, but also extremely cluttered and messy. If I wanted to actually thoroughly examine what's behind me, I'd have to get up, that's how bad it is. But I didn't feel that were necessary. Yeah, I found it a bit unsettling any time I heard a noise, but I really didn't think it was anything to be concerned about. I tried to continue playing, however I wasn't able to give my full focus anymore, not with part of me constantly thinking about the noise. I took off the headphones and played with them off just because I was feeling extra paranoid and wanted to hear my surroundings. Shortly after taking off the headset, there was a sudden clank sound, and it had a metallic, echoey ringing to it. I turned off the system now because I was in shock. This was an intentional sound made by someone or something. I walked really, really slowly to the backside of the basement. When I laid eyes on the big metal air vent in the corner, that's when it hit me, that was most likely the source of the sound. I got as close as I felt comfortable, then stopped and just looked at the air vent for a second. I got a terrible, painful feeling in my stomach, and I felt like the life was literally being drained out of me when I saw a hand reach out from the air vent and start waving me over. Then a deep, raspy voice said, "Come here, I need help." At first I didn't run. I just gradually stepped backwards with my mouth hung open, looking at the vent. The person's hands gripped the vent and started shaking it aggressively, obviously trying to break it open. I screamed, "I'm calling the cops," but the shaking didn't stop. I did what I said. I called the cops and told them to send someone right away. The operator told me to go to a room upstairs with a weapon, lock the door, and hide. I was the most scared I'd ever been in my entire life. And the pain and fear of the situation only became worse when I heard a door bust open downstairs, and I could hear a maniac screaming at the top of his lungs. I'm not lying when I said he was screaming things like, "Where are you? I'm gonna kill you." I heard him run up the stairs. He probably ran up 2 stairs for every step because he was up the stairs in like 3 seconds. My heart was in my throat when he tried the doorknob to the door and started pounding on it so hard I could see the door caving in a little bit. I thought he was actually gonna break the door down. I had to climb out the window or I'd be a goner. I think he heard me though, because the banging stopped. I jumped from the window to the bushes below, and with the right stroke of luck, a cop car pulled up in front of my house. I basically ran into the officer's arms, begging them to go inside and get the man. They told me to wait in the police car which they locked, while they both went inside the house with their guns drawn. Not even 5 minutes later, the 2 officers came out and they were holding the man in cuffs. The man in cuffs took my place in the backseat of the cop car, and from that moment, until the cops drove away, he was giving me the most evil, hate-filled stare you could ever imagine. That stare still haunts me. The whole experience still haunts me. I still hang out in the basement occasionally, but nowhere near as much. The story I'm about to tell you is a series of blurry memories from when I was a little kid and we were living in our old house. My brother and I always hung out in the basement where our dad has his hockey table, pool table, and video games. We usually played on his Super Nintendo system, but at some point, I don't remember when it started, my brother and I would hear things come from the boiler/laundry room. The first time this happened though, my brother and I were playing some racing game on Super Nintendo. That was when we both heard it. The door to the dryer slammed shut. We knew that's what the sound was. We both called out Mom, figuring maybe she'd been in there the whole time without us realizing. But the room was dark and empty of any people. When we realized this, we both ran upstairs screaming for our parents, leaving everything downstairs still on. Our parents came down to humor what they probably thought was just our dumb childish antics, and nobody was in the laundry room. Moving along probably a few months, I was awake late one night for whatever reason, walking to the kitchen, passing the basement door, and remember hearing the TV downstairs turn on. It was one of those big old box TVs, so it made that distinct clicking sound as it turned on. I called Mom, Dad, and my brother's name. No one answered. I went to my parents' room to tell them, and they were both upset with me for waking them. My dad went downstairs to turn off the TV, and I remember him telling me it's a glitchy TV. There were a couple other suspicious happenings after that, but I'll move forward all the way to the last occurrence, and honestly the most horrific. It was a few days before we were going to move to our new house. Just about everything in the house was already shipped to the new house, but our parents were nice and let us keep the TV and video games downstairs until the last few days. My brother and I were once again playing video games. That's when I felt something hit me in the back of the head. I thought it was my brother at first, but then saw the red ball bouncing on the ground behind the couch we were on. Then the door to the boiler room slowly shut as my brother and I looked at each other with horrified looks on our faces. Once again, we ran upstairs screaming. Our parents once again went downstairs, but when they came back up, they were strangely silent. They told us to go to our rooms and wait there. A while later, a police car showed up, but our parents wouldn't let us out of our rooms. They wouldn't tell us what happened until we finally moved. Apparently, my dad tried to open the boiler room door, but something was holding it shut, or perhaps pulling it shut. Even so long ago, I could sense fear in my dad's voice explaining it. I don't believe in ghosts, but to this day, I still don't know what to make of what was going on in that basement. Every so often when we were little, our parents would go away for a weekend while our Uncle Ron would watch us. Our Uncle Ron has been single his whole life, but he always loved kids, so he always happily did it. One Friday night, the same night our parents left town, we were all watching Titanic during a monster snowstorm. Me, my two brothers, my older sister, and our Uncle Ron. I remember certain parts of this night so vividly, but other parts I just draw blanks. I do remember, however, that the power flicked off briefly, and we had to reset the VCR to get back to where we were in the movie. Shortly after that, our Uncle Ron was fast asleep. We let him sleep while we kept watching the movie. It was at the part where Rose was running with the axe back to the room that Jack was trapped in. One of my brothers was coming back from the bathroom, and on his way, he went outside for whatever reason, likely just to look at the snow. He came back inside yelling for us to come take a look at something. Starved for a little excitement, I guess, the three of us ran to the back door. We could see what he was talking about now. There was a set of footprints in the snow. It led from the back door, then to the window, and then back in the direction of the yard and woods. To make the matter even more eerie, he said he heard the back doorknob turn. Our sister, even though she was the oldest by 3 years, ran inside freaking out. My brothers and I, on the other hand, were kind of excited by it and wanted to follow the footprints. Our sister was threatening to wake up our Uncle Ron as she saw us putting our coats and boots on, but I convinced her it'd be fine and we weren't going too far, and that we'd be together. She went back to the living room to watch the movie without us while we all marched out into the cold snowstorm, following the footprints that were quickly filling in with new snow. The footprints led to the woods in the backyard. The deeper into the woods we got, the deeper the footprints were. We weren't sure if that was because less snow was falling to the ground under the trees, or because the footprints were fresher. We were following those footprints for a while, until finally, we saw where they were leading to. A cabin, literally tucked away in the woods. It was dark inside though. No light was emitting from the windows. The footsteps led to the front door of the cabin, but we didn't dare go up to it. Instead, we crept over to the closest window to peer inside. It was too dark to see anything inside though, but we noticed it wasn't actually a glass window. It was just a screen. Then there were 2 thumps from inside of the cabin, and then the sound of something sliding. We didn't see what caused the sound though. Suddenly, one of my brothers screamed and pointed behind us. We turned to see a head poking out from another window of the cabin, but it was so dark all we could see was blackness, no features. Then the head disappeared from view as we heard rapid thumping sounds inside of the cabin, and then the front door to the cabin burst open. We all screamed and ran for our dear lives back in the direction of the house, following the footprints. I don't think we were actually chased though. The next day we tried taking our Uncle Ron on a hike to that cabin, but we couldn't for the lives of us find it. The creepiest thing to this day, we still live in the same house, and after all these years, we still never came across that cabin again. In fact, we can't even find it on maps or Google Earth. If it weren't for the fact that I was with my 2 brothers, I would question if this ever even happened. My friends, who I'll refer to as S and J, came along with me on a little camping trip near Blue Mountain National Park. We set up camp near a small pond just because it seemed like the coolest place to chill. The point of this whole trip was mainly just to get out, drink a bunch of beers with friends, and chill. I cracked open my second Budweiser, laughing it up with S and J, talking about some of our other friends with music playing in the background, overall just having a good time. Then, however, I saw S reach over for the speaker and turn it down all the way, and then shushed us and pointed out to the pond. S whispered, "Do you guys see that?" Jay and I looked out to the pond. The campfire had a glow that partially reflected on the pond water, but even yet, I couldn't see what he was pointing at. S whispered, "There's something in the water." I went into the tent to get the flashlight from my bag. When I came out, S said don't, but I turned it on anyway and aimed it at the pond. The light didn't reveal anything or anyone, but we did all hear the sound of water being pushed, as if someone or something were walking in it. I turned out the light just because I was freaked out and looked at my 2 friends, who were both wearing cringing faces. I told S to shut off the speakers completely now. We all sat in our chairs, not really saying much anymore, just listening to the surroundings. About an hour passed, and within that time, nothing happened. So we grew more comfortable again, and things went back to normal. Eventually, I went to my tent, and S and J went to the tent that they'd be sharing, and we all went to sleep. Now that I was alone with my thoughts, however, I started thinking of that thing that S said was in the water. He never actually described what it looked like, if it was an animal or a person. My sense of hearing was heightened as I was in a state of alert, and because of that, I heard something from the woods. I sat up, since that always seems to help with concentration. I needed to hear one more sound before I could confirm something wasn't right. There was the sound again, much closer now, and I was able to confirm it was a foot hitting the ground. Whether it was a person's foot or an animal's foot was still unclear, however. I heard another footstep, this time much closer. It was clear someone or something was sneaking around our campsite. There was one final footstep. It was really close to the tent. I started texting S, but I was only able to type out the words, "There's something," before the gut-wrenching, blood-curdling scream pierced through the walls of the tent. I couldn't tell if it was the scream of a man or a woman. It's hard to explain, but it was deep enough where it could be a man, but not so deep to the point that it couldn't be a woman. The scream lasted about 5 seconds. Then there was silence. I didn't know if I should get out, call for my friends, or stay silent. I texted S, "Dude, we have to run." He responded, "What was that?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I tried to think of what we could do. But pretty soon, S texted me again, saying the coast is clear, run for the car. I grabbed the keys from my bag, opened the zipper to the tent, and sprinted to the car, which luckily was only about 30 seconds away. We stayed in the car all night and went back the next morning for our stuff, which luckily was all still there. Still have no idea who, or even dare I say what that thing was at our campsite that night. Just happy we got out okay. Skipping most of the background of the story, I once found myself walking through the woods during a slight drizzle. All I had on me was my backpack with a spare pair of pants, a flashlight, a tripod and camera, and some granola bars. I'm a photographer and video editor, and I was recording footage of a forest during rain, a river during rain, and snagging some pictures as well. Long story short, I found myself lost, trying to find my car. It was the worst day of my life. I was panicking, stressed, screaming to myself in anger, just wanting to find the car. I'd say an hour after getting lost, I started to pick up on noises around me. I don't mean multiple noises at once. I mean at times I'd hear the same noise, just on different sides of me. The noise was footsteps, undeniably. I was starting to panic that I was being hunted by a bear. That was only at first, though. I slowed down to quiet my own footsteps so I would more likely hear where the other footsteps were, and when I did, I turned my head as quickly as possible in that direction. I saw half a person's body jumping behind a tree. Instead of calling out something or confronting them, I did what I still think was the smart thing. I walked away fast, playing it off like I didn't see him. It was starting to get darker every minute now, and the rain was still coming down lightly. But my heart was racing faster than ever. I checked my phone every 10 seconds and finally got one bar. I stopped walking, wiped the screen of rainwater, and opened maps first thing to find the nearest road, which was very close. I let out a sigh of relief, only to hear footsteps closing in on me from behind. I turned and spotted the person again. It was a man, and I know that in of itself doesn't sound so disturbing. Just really sketchy, but I'm telling you, the sight was horrifying. I could only see the man briefly before he jumped behind a tree once again as if he thought I couldn't see him. But he looked huge. Really tall, average build, maybe a little overweight, jeans, and from what I could tell, a dark blue jacket with the hood up, half zipped down, exposing a white shirt underneath. He also had on glasses, but that's all I got of his face. He was hiding behind a tree maybe 15 feet away, and over the sound of millions of raindrops, all I heard was psst, psst. Now I ran. I didn't care anymore. I was borderline about to have a panic attack. I continued running when I found the road. I ran until I thought there was no chance of him catching up to me. Then I continued walking until I finally hitched a ride from a passing car, who took me back to where I was parked. I didn't bother mentioning what happened to the driver. I just told him I got lost is all. He went on his way as I got into my car and drove the half-hour trip back home, all the while reflecting on what just happened and my life. In 7th grade, we took an end-of-the-year field trip to an aquarium near school. It was called Ripley's Aquarium of the Smokies. We live in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, a literal mountain town, with nothing but hills and mountains as far as the eyes can see. Our science teacher, Mr. Russo, was our chaperone for the trip. He was a very lax teacher, so while other teacher chaperones were more uptight and strict with their groups, Mr. Russo was more chill about his job. That may seem like a good thing, but because of his lackadaisical approach at supervising, my friend Aiden and I were able to easily bail from the aquarium lobby away from the rest of the groups. We quite simply didn't want to wait so long for all the groups to move. The whole aquarium was empty, except for our classes, so when Aiden and I walked through the passageways, or I guess observation areas as you would say, before everyone else, we didn't see anyone else. We got the best views at all the big fish tanks and habitats. We moved on to the next dark room, all of which were lit up with a dark blue tint from the fish tanks, by the way. This room had a lot of big tanks with tropical fish. We were making jokes about finding Nemo fish like clownfish and the dory fish, and that's when I remember someone calling "hey" to us in a very assertive, commanding voice. It was some guy in cargo shorts and a green t-shirt. He asked us if we were with the field trip. I was about to shake my head no, but Aiden said yes. The man told us to come with him right now. We both assumed he worked for the aquarium, so we followed. He wasn't leading us back to the lobby though. He was leading us through some narrow, dark hallways. I remember passing the bathrooms and a few exit signs hanging on the ceiling before reaching an exit door. He led us outside to some back area, I guess by the woods. I finally asked if he worked there and where he was leading us. He said yes, he did work there, and that he had to drive us back around to the front of the aquarium in order to be let back in. It made just as much sense back then as it does now, but we were two nervous 7th graders who thought we were about to get in serious trouble. So when he led us to his car, we willingly got in the back seats. He told us to strap in, and he pulled out from the back parking lot and onto the street. Just as we thought he was going to make a right turn towards the front, he turned left. Right away, both Aiden and I asked him where he was going at the same time. He didn't answer that question, but about 5 seconds later, we heard the locks to the back doors click down, and he made some kind of threat along the lines of, "If either of you try to make any moves, I'll kill you." He then proceeded to slide out what appeared to be a big knife in his glove box as some kind of threat. Aiden and I sat in silence. I'm sure he wanted to throw up just like I wanted to. We had to think of a way to escape, but we couldn't talk to each other because the man kept looking in the rearview mirror every other second. He was driving us uphill through some woodsy, isolated neighborhood until he finally pulled over onto the side of the road in what appeared to be the middle of nowhere. No houses, no through traffic. He told us to stay in the car as he got out, with his knife in his hand. I whispered to Aiden to be prepared to run as soon as I said to. The man came to my door, popped it open, and told me to step out. He told me to tell my friend that if he wants me alive, he better be in the car by the time we got back. I felt a deepening feeling in my stomach when I heard that. The man started walking me to the woods with the knife probably in his pocket, to do God knows what. I saw Aiden sliding over to my side of the car, which had an unlocked door, and when he seemed ready to run, I screamed "run." Aiden was off already, running downhill. I easily dodged the man as I fled past him, following Aiden. The man tried chasing us on foot, and I'm not even kidding when I say he threw the knife at me. He missed with only maybe a few inches to spare. I heard the clanging of the knife hitting the ground ahead of me. I didn't stop to pick it up. I just kept running downhill in the direction we came. The man stopped following after throwing the knife. I think he got back in his car and fled the scene. We somehow managed to make it back to the aquarium in under an hour, and we also managed to sneak back into the group. Mr. Russo didn't even notice. Aiden and I decided to keep quiet about what just happened. What purpose would it serve getting ourselves in trouble, given that there was relatively no chance of that man getting caught? As we got older, we started to wonder more and more what the intentions of that man were. We could obviously think of a few likely ones, but either way, we kept quiet about it and don't really like to think about it. When I was in 8th grade, all of my classmates and I looked forward to our Washington, D.C. field trip. The thrill of going on any sort of trip with your friends was enough to excite us. After all preparations, we were ready for D.C. Once we arrived to our destination, my class of around 100 students were partitioned off into 3 groups, and within these groups were our 3 other hotel mates. Each group was sent off in different coach buses, and we would be taken to different attractions throughout DC, neighboring states, monuments, parks, food stops, museums, and more. After a long weekend of visiting educational sites, our teachers decided to treat us to a colonial ghost tour one night. It was an evening walking tour through some of America's historical sites near village cemeteries and old townhomes. I don't remember exactly which city we were in, but I remember the guides telling us that many of the empty homes were preserved due to their historical significance. I've always been scared of most things related to ghosts and such, but I was positive that nothing would happen in our ghost tour. We split off into smaller groups of around 10 members each, and were instructed to carry around a camera if we wished. The guide kept telling us not to expect much from the tour, that there would most likely be nothing supernatural during the course of the evening. As we wandered from colonial home to cemetery plot to colonial home, I just took interest in the histories that the guides would share of each home. They would indulge us in the stories of each homeowner while my friends would snap away at photos, hoping to find a shiny orb. One of my friends, Jessica, that I was sharing a room with during that trip, was not one of the kids that were constantly taking pictures. She would take a photograph every once in a while, but spent most of the time listening. My group reached a small 2-story home in the middle of the street. The house had an ominous blue hue to the windows, but the house was vacant. I remember being very curious about this home. The tour guide began to tell us a little bit about the house. She had mentioned that the home had originally belonged to a man and his beautiful wife. He adored his wife, and the couple was thrilled to receive news that they would be expecting a child. Unfortunately, the wife had died after giving birth to a baby girl. The man was absolutely devastated and grew to resent his homely daughter. During her childhood, he kept her in the house as much as he could. He reminded her about how homely she looked and could not find her a suitor. Feeling that she had no other purpose, he had his daughter learn how to sew and weave upstairs, using her only good attribute, her hands. After hearing this story, I remember the sorrow that I felt for this girl. She and her father must have lived unhappily in that house until their deaths. My friend Jessica took a photograph of the house, and we both moved on to the next house. I kept walking until Jessica stopped and became silent, looking down in her digital camera screen. I walked over and scanned the photograph. I saw a gleam coming from the edge of the 2nd floor window on the right. I had her zoom on the scene. After zooming in, you could clearly see 3 figures staring out from the window. On the way right was the translucent outline of a woman. A taller man was standing behind her to the side. Even more curiously, there was a 3rd figure. It appeared to be a woman, but she was harder to make out. The body was there for sure, but her skin was not as clear. Jessica and I freaked out. The first woman and man made sense to me. That would explain the man and his daughter. But who was this 3rd dark woman off the side? I raised my hand and had to ask the guide, was there ever another person that lived with this family at the house we just looked at? The guide looked surprised at my question and answered, yeah, during the time of their residence, they had a black female servant living with them. Senior year of high school. My forensics teacher, Mr. Stevenson, somehow convinced the school to let him take us on a field trip to some abandoned building in the woods that was the site of a major crime scene. I think he might have finessed it a bit and made the school think we'd just be studying the perimeter and outside of the building, but we did much more than that. Mainly, it used to be a drug den. When we got there, I realized how frighteningly tall the building actually was, and its location was just surreal, surrounded by forest in every direction, and the only road that leads up to it is a road you would never think to drive down just because of the grass growing in the street. Since our current topic at the time of our class was dealing with drugs, Mr. Stevenson led us into the abandoned building. He gave a tour of the place as if he'd been there many times before, and he seemed to know quite a bit of history about the building. For example, that the actual original purpose of the building was unknown. Apparently, construction on the higher levels wasn't even finished before the building was abandoned. Its location and size made it ideal for drug deals and other illegal activity to take place, which surprised all of us since there we were, inside of this apparent former drug den for a school field trip. Mr. Stevenson was so laxed about this trip that he didn't even notice when a couple students wandered off to explore on their own. Or maybe he just didn't care. Given that a few other students did it, me and my friend Gianna, or G, decided to go off on our own too. And yes, I'm a guy. I just so happened to have a really close friend that was a girl back in high school. There had to be at least 8 floors in this building, but we saw from the outside the top few floors looked unfinished. I basically forced G to come all the way upstairs with me to the top few floors. Worst came to worst, we wouldn't be able to find the group again, and we just returned to the bus right outside. We climbed the stairs, one flight after another. It was weird. As we reached the middle floors, the amount of debris and graffiti lessened a bit, but then as we got to the higher floors, there was even more graffiti and litter than the lower floors. Then things got sketchy. It seemed we were on the second highest floor, and everything on this floor was still just wood foundation. A lot of it seemed to be rotting, and there were a lot of holes up there. We would have gone up to the last floor, but the stairs had been completely stripped and broken. Basically, there were no stairs to the last floor. There had to be a way up there, though. So we watched our step for weak wood as we navigated the floor. Then, Gianna grabbed my shoulder and stopped me. She pointed up at a hole in the ceiling and said she saw something. Then there was a ticking noise, like the kind of ticking noise a person makes when they're calling their cat or something. Followed by that, someone's arm came into view from the hole above us. Just their arm, though, and judging by the position of the arm, whoever's arm it was must have been laying down flat on the floor beside the hole. They had a long black sleeve on, so the only skin that was visible was their hand. G was scared. I laughed a little at first, but I'm not going to say it wasn't slightly unnerving. Gianna started telling me let's go back down. I started calling up to the person, how do we get up there? They didn't answer. Instead, they just kept making the ticking noise and waving us up. That's when things started getting really creepy, and I agreed with G that we should go back down. Right after I said this, the person pulled their arm out from the hole, and we heard the sound of a shoe quickly scrape the wood foundation above us as the person was clearly getting up. We couldn't see, though. I nudged Gianna to move. I was creeped out and just wanted to get back down. As we were about to leave the main open layout room and back into the stairway corridor, there was a crash far behind us. We turned and saw a man on the complete opposite side of the room, facing the wall. It seemed he just jumped through one of the holes. He then quickly turned his head to look at us, without moving his body. There was something about his face and clothing. He didn't look like the typical urban exploration type. He looked dangerous and unstable. G and I ran for it now, down one flight of stairs at a time. 3 flights down, I looked up the long corridor above us and saw the man at top looking down at me. I yelled go to Gianna. We kept going down. Like 5 flights later, I looked up again, and there was the man again, looking down at me. This time he seemed much closer, and I just realized he'd been chasing us. We got to the bottom, and I looked up one more time, and I didn't see him this time. We heard the voice of Mr. Stevenson nearby, and I kind of started to laugh about what just happened. Not exactly because I found it funny, but because I was just happy that we made it back safely. G was not laughing though. She was genuinely disturbed. We found Mr. Stevenson, who asked where we were, and we told the truth about what just happened. He was pretty mad at us, but given what we just told him, he also advised we should leave the building. The other kids who wandered off had returned, and when we got to the bus, Mr. Stevenson did a head count like 3 times. Overall, the trip wasn't a failure for the rest. The other kids did learn things about the building and drugs, but for my friend Gianna and I, really, it was the most horrific thing we ever went through. I was 14, 8th grade, last year of middle school. I had to go, so I got up from my seat in math class, took the wooden plank that was supposed to be the bathroom pass, and strolled through the hallways to the bathroom. The bathroom on the main floor had a sign on it saying out of order, use upstairs or downstairs bathroom. A random older guy walked up to me and asked with a smile on his face if I knew where the nearest bathroom was. I told him yeah, either upstairs or downstairs. He thanked me and walked to the stairs. So to avoid more potential conversation with the guy, I went down. I wondered who that guy could be, definitely not staff. Maybe a parent. I went down to the lower level, which was literally only for bathrooms and extra locker rooms for the sport teams. I opened the door to the bathroom. The light was off, as usual for this bathroom since it was the least used one. I went to the stall and shut the door. I covered the toilet seat with paper and sat down. Suddenly, there was a white light flashing in the bathroom, and I heard the sound of the fire alarm outside of the bathroom. It was a fire drill. My heart dropped because I didn't know what to do. It was the first fire drill of the year. Would I get away with just using the bathroom while everyone else was outside? At this point, I figured I'd just do it. The flashing light got a bit annoying, as did the alarm coming from outside. Suddenly, the alarm got much louder. Then I realized it was because the door opened, and over came marching somebody right to my stall door. I saw their feet underneath the stall. I thought for sure it was a teacher coming to check the room for any students. They didn't say anything though. I didn't know if I should say something or not. I looked at their shoes. They were just facing the door. But I noticed they weren't just standing there. I saw through that dreaded 1-inch crack of the stall door that everybody hates, someone's face pressed up against it. Most apparently, a man's eye, open as wide as possible. Then there was a chuckle from the other side. I was breathing heavily now, heart racing too. I didn't know if I should scream or not. Then, the person got on his knees and stuck his head underneath the stall to look at me. It was that man from the hallway. When he saw it was me, he literally crawled under the door and into the stall and grabbed a hold of me, covering my mouth first thing. I remember he said things like, "Don't struggle and just relax." I didn't know what he was going to do to me. It was an unreal feeling, like my life was flashing before my eyes at such a young age, an age that you think you're invincible. Then, the fire alarm got louder again as the door opened. It was the principal's voice. "Is anybody in here?" I screamed, and though muffled through the man's hand, the principal heard it and came rushing over to the stall trying to open it. He screamed to open the door. The man let go of me, opened the door in the principal's face, and ran for it. The principal was a very old man, so he didn't chase after him. The school also didn't have cameras at this point, so as far as I know, the guy got away. The principal actually hugged me and was very emotional, telling me to come with him so we could call my parents. All my friends saw me almost in tears walking with my parents to their car. It was humiliating. but I was also just happy. The principal saw the man pull the fire alarm and run downstairs, so he slowly but surely made his way down there and checked the bathroom first thing. He unfortunately passed away 5 years ago. I still have great appreciation for that principal. He was my hero in a certain way. Back in high school, fire drills were usually a lot of fun, depending on what class you were in and which friends you were with. One particular dark, cloudy day during third period, my friends and I who were in the same class heard from the grapevine that there was going to be a fire drill this period. It was a Friday close to the end of the year, and there was really no work for any of us in our later classes. So we figured during the fire drill we'd sneak down to the sump behind the school by the woods and smoke. We waited anxiously for that ear-piercing ringing to go off, and when it did, it was music to our ears. We looked at each other and laughed, and we were the first ones out of the class and down the hall. While everyone else on this side of the school was headed to the front entrance, we were on our way to the back entrance by the woods. We walked out in the middle of the crowd to the back section of the school by the basketball and tennis courts. We were pretty strategic about our escape. We made sure there were no teachers in sight and crossed through a narrow opening between the tennis courts and a line of bushes. That led straight to the sump. A couple of kids watched us and probably thought we were a bunch of weirdos, but it didn't matter. We made it to the sump, which was literally a giant hole in the ground surrounded by bushes and trees, right at the edge of the woods. It had a nickname, but I don't remember it. All I know is it was the place that everyone came to drink, smoke, and do other drugs at night. Kids even had bonfires there before. It was a really dark day. The clouds were a darkish gray, giving the morning an almost early night kind of feeling. The breezy air hinted at a storm approaching too, which honestly just made it more fun for some reason. We waited until all the commotion up the hill quieted down, and we assumed everyone went back inside. Then we started talking and laughing. My friend went through his bag to get out that pipe and grinder. That's when I noticed something in the distance by the woods. It looked kind of like a person's face. A couple shrubs covered where the body would be, but what I saw just looked too much like a face. I looked away for a second to get my friend's attention and then pointed in the direction of it, but when I looked back, it was gone. They thought I was an idiot, but now that it was gone, I was like 70% sure what I saw was a person. The other 30% of me wasn't sure if I was just imagining things. It was very dark after all. They didn't want to move though, so I didn't either. We smoked, and the higher I got, the more paranoid I got. I secretly never really enjoyed smoking too much for that reason. It gets me paranoid. But I went along with it just because it was what my group of friends did. Now that I was high, all that I was thinking of was that face in the woods. Did someone see us? Were we going to get in trouble? That's all I could think about. My friends wanted to walk through the woods now to an old shack that used to be used by the school for something. It was about a minute walk into the woods. I was uncomfortable with it. The air started to feel moist, and I started to feel those tiny pre-storm rain droplets. I once again warned them that we should go back because of the storm. They kind of ignored me. On the way there, I swore I could hear footsteps that weren't ours. But honestly, I was so high I didn't even know where I was hearing them from. In front of us, behind us, to the left, right, I had no idea. Then, from behind us, I was sure I heard a big stick snap in half. I stopped and turned around, saying loudly, "What the fuck was that?" My friends stopped too, but they didn't hear it apparently. There was nobody visible behind us, and once again my friends thought I was an idiot. Apparently I seemed like I was losing my mind because I became the blunt of all my friends' jokes after that. The big old shack finally came into view. It was bigger than I remembered, and more creepy looking. The school stopped using this old building years ago, probably because it looked like it was about to collapse. Even the path that led to the front door had grass growing through the cracks. The front door was wedged open, of course. Surely students came in there all the time. My friend Jack pushed open the door fully with force. It was so dark in there. There was little light from outside to begin with. It seemed like there was just a bunch of old, empty crates, a lot of them smashed to pieces. There was a kind of nasty smell, however, one that my friends didn't remember the last time we were in there. The sound of something squishy plopping on the ground, and then a foot hitting the wood floor made us all jump. In the corner of the room was the shadow outline of a really tall person. We could only see him due to the little amount of light sneaking in through the window. We didn't scream or anything. We simply walked out the door the way we came in and walked quickly back in the direction of the school, aka civilization. All three of us took a look back at the window nearest to the person, and I swear to God, at that exact moment, the first flash of lightning struck, and what we saw during that flash was nothing short of horrifying. There was a guy with a seriously deformed face standing at the window, and I don't mean to talk ill of anyone with any kind of deformity, but this man almost didn't look human. Half of his face seemed to be drooping down. You couldn't even see one of his eyes. He was so close to the window too, his face was practically pressed up against it. I initiated a run and my friends followed. We got back down to the sump in less than a minute, where we collected our thoughts on what to do next, just as the rain started to finally come down. And just then, my friend Jack pointed up the hill back to the woods. There was a person standing behind a shrub, exposing only his face, just like what I saw before. This time 10 times closer, but still not close enough to describe his face. All I know is it wasn't the same person as in the shack. We ran back to the school and hid by the back entrance where it was dry. We all came to an agreement to just go home, forget about what just happened, not to tell anyone, and never go back to that shack again. And that was exactly what we did. Our school had this door that led down to a half stairway to some weird dark hallway. A lot of students knew about it, but nobody really knew what was down there. The door only seemed to be open during fire drills, in which just about every door in the building is opened. My friend Kyle and I were particularly interested in finding out what was down there. I'll admit I was a pretty bad student in my first 2 years of high school, and I got into a lot of trouble. So Kyle and I planning to venture down there during a fire drill wasn't one of our dumbest ideas. We had 3 classes together out of 8, so our chances of being in the same class during a fire drill was pretty decent, and luckily it happened during study hall. So as the alarm rang, Kyle and I ran to one of the bathrooms, which already had its door wedged open with a door stopper. We hid in one of the stalls until all the commotion in the hall was gone and everyone was outside. Then, getting down those stairs was a piece of cake. There was a very dim light hanging from the ceiling. It gave off just enough light to see a doorway that led to another half flight of stairs, this one to complete darkness. We looked for a light switch but couldn't find one. We used the screens on our phones as light to navigate the dark. We found a door that had a "Do Not Enter" sign on it. Of course, what did we do? We opened the door, struggling at that nonetheless. It felt like it was 1,000 pounds, and it scraped along the floor as if it had fallen off its hinges. When we managed to get it open, we found just a small, square room, maybe 100 square feet. The room wasn't silent though. There was a little clicking sound, kind of like a metallic dinging. It was coming from a vent in the corner. We had to see what it could be. Maybe an animal or something. But as we went closer, we started to hear grunting and groaning type noises. Kyle dared me to hover the screen over the vent to see what was inside. I really wanted to know what was in there, so I did. I pressed the screen of my phone up to the vents and got on my knees. Now I could hear breathing. I pressed my ear up against the vent and immediately felt something grab onto my ear. I screamed in a panic, and Kyle quickly came and pulled the hand off my ear. I jumped away from the vent first of all, and saw a hand reaching through it. Kyle and I ran out of there, shutting the do not enter door behind us and running back upstairs to the bathroom. The next day, Kyle and I went to talk to the janitor, Tom. He was one of the janitors who didn't really give a crap about his job. He didn't even seem angry about us going down there, he just asked what we were doing. We explained what happened and asked if there was somebody working in the vents. He said nobody had been in that room for years, nor was there any way into that vent down there. Kyle and I looked at each other, and I knew his heart sank just like mine did, as we both stood there wondering, who was in that vent down there that day? When I was in my senior year of high school, 17 years old, all that was on my and my friends' minds were girls. There was one girl in particular in my physics class that I was really into. Her name was Tiffany. Some guys called her Crazy Tiff because she was super hot, but also apparently really crazy according to her exes. That's irrelevant to this story though. Basically, my best friend CJ managed to get one of Tiffany's best friends, Gianna, to agree to come hang out at some beach with him and I that night since it was a Friday and the weather was warm. The best part, Tiffany agreed to come with. This was it, my big chance with Crazy Tiff. CJ pulled up to my house at 10 o'clock that night. I hopped in shotgun and we went to pick up Tiffany and Gianna. On our way there, we agreed our first priority was getting me alone with Tiffany and CJ getting alone with Gianna. I was extremely nervous, but when Tiffany and Gianna got in the car, things were actually going pretty smoothly. CJ and I managed to make them laugh a bunch of times. By the time we got to the beach, I was confident Tiffany and I would vibe really well alone. I don't remember the tiny details of what happened after we stepped out of the car and onto the dunes, but I do remember the beach being completely void of any other people, and CJ somehow managed to go off alone with Gianna into the darkness after a few minutes, just like we planned. Tiffany and I took a walk down to the water and wet our feet and whatnot. Then we just laid in the sand and talked for a while. Things were going smoothly until Tiffany pointed out to the ocean. "What is that?" she said. I looked to where she was pointing but didn't see anything. I was laughing at her apparent delusion and got up to go closer to the water in hopes of maybe seeing what she saw. My feet touched the cold water, and that's when I was close enough to see it. There was a long, vertically standing object in the water. I inched a little closer and saw it move. I jumped out of the water and ran back to Tiffany. "It's a person," I said quietly to her. It was truly bizarre, the fact that anyone would be in the freezing cold water at this hour. Tiffany wanted to move because she was uncomfortable, and it seemed like whoever it was just watching us. Somehow it just felt like that. So we took a walk further down the beach until we thought we had privacy. We sat back down on the beach with nothing but the sound of the ocean waves and our voices. But Tiffany was once again the one to point out something. "Do you hear that?" she asked me. I did kind of hear it. It was like a smaller kind of splashing sound, but it stopped just as soon as it started. We looked out to the ocean, and I heard Tiffany gasp. The guy was out there again. I was going to go out there and tell him to back off, but Tiffany told me, "Let's just go." Low-key, I was hoping she would. I just wanted to look tough in front of her. We got back to the car. CJ and Gianna weren't back yet. Suddenly, my phone started blowing up with texts, all from CJ. Apparently, he'd been texting me in some kind of panic the whole time we were on the beach, and I guess I didn't have reception out by the water. He texted me first saying, "Dude, some weird guy is in the water watching us." And then, "Yo, some weird deformed looking guy is stalking us. Get to the car now." 5 minutes later, he sent a couple other texts, basically panicking over being followed by something in the dark. Keyword something, not someone, something. His second to last text said he was coming to look for us and to answer when I got this. His last text was, "We're on our way back to the car now, get there." He also tried calling me 3 times apparently. I called him back at once and he picked up right away out of breath, not even letting me speak. All he asked was if we were at the car, and I said yes. He said good, stay right there, and hung up the phone. Less than 30 seconds later, Gianna and CJ came out of the surrounding darkness next to the Jeep. He explained the best he could while trying to catch his breath that some deformed-looking creature walking on 2 legs was following them. I didn't know whether to laugh at what he said or not. I told him about how we saw someone in the water too. He asked me to describe what it looked like. I kept getting confused by his way of describing the person, as if they were a creature. I told him it looked like a really tall, lanky person standing in the water. He said he got a chance to get a closer look at it, and it was some kind of deformed humanoid thing. Tiffany and I looked at each other, and now we kind of nervously laughed. What he was saying was just too bizarre, but I think parts of both of us took him seriously. Gianna vouched for what he was saying. That scream made us all jump into the car. It was some kind of half-human, half-demonic kind of screaming. I can't describe it, you just have to hear it. Needless to say, we were all frantic in the car, asking CJ questions mainly. But closer to the end of the ride, we all grew silent. I guess we were all just lost in our thoughts about what just happened. To give you an idea of how quickly all this happened, we were on the dunes for about half an hour. After I heard that sound, that scream, I did start to believe CJ partially, but I still feel like what I saw in the ocean was a person. But CJ's way of describing who, or what was following him as some kind of deformed humanoid thing on the beach is what still freaks me out the most. Our old town in Florida was right by a bunch of different beaches. My sisters and I would frequently go to the beach during the sunset hours because less people were there and the views were always beautiful. Sometimes we'd play volleyball, sometimes we'd go in the water, and sometimes we'd just lay in the sand. My youngest sister Ksenia, who was 13 years old, wanted to go in the water one night. The sun was setting and it was getting dark out, so as the older brother and basically the supervisor, I told her to be back in 10 minutes. She ran into the water, and after watching her for about a minute, I looked down at my phone. My other sister, who was 16 years old, wanted to play volleyball. I was up for it. There was a volleyball net and a poorly inflated volleyball sitting next to it. It was good enough, though. We made do with it. When I looked away from the volleyball net, I couldn't see Ksenia. I looked every possible direction she could have gone in the water. I did not see her. It was getting darker and harder to see. I ran to the water to try and find Ksenia. I ran into the water, and when I couldn't run anymore, I swam. She wasn't in the water anywhere, though. But I saw a boat nearby. A big, luxurious boat, close enough to swim over to. It took me a couple minutes, but I got there. I hoisted myself up onto the bow, off some tiny step ladder, and I heard laughing below deck. There was a hatch door that was opened, and there were lights on down there. I called out for help. Then there was silence. I called out that I was looking for my sister. Then I heard Ksenia's voice from below the deck. She called out my name. I hurried down the stairs into the cabin to see Ksenia sitting on a bed with a Coke in her hand. Further down the cabin were 2 grown-ass men sitting opposite each other, looking at me. I grabbed Ksenia into my arms, and one of the men said with a smile that I have a very nice sister. The other man seemed to catch on to my suspicion right away and claimed that the 2 of them were just offering to give her a ride and some snacks because they saw her all alone in the water. I didn't even say a word to them. One of them asked if we needed a ride back to shore. I didn't answer. I told Ksenia to swim back to the beach with me. We got back to shore in a couple minutes, and the boat was far gone into the sunset. I brought my 2 sisters home and had my dad figure out what he should do. First of all, he was mad at me for not getting details of the boat or the men's faces, and he was right. My dad punished Ksenia and prohibited her from going to the beach past sunrise from there on out. I have a beach house in Florida that I tend to visit with my girlfriend in the colder months up north. In the warmer months, we'd still visit occasionally, but nowhere near as much since there wasn't as much of a need to. It was early February, freezing up in Connecticut, so my girlfriend and I took a trip down to Florida to visit the beach house. By the time we actually got to the house after the day-and-a-half drive, it was starting to get dark out. It was actually a long month and a half since I'd been there last at the time. The electricity, the water, and everything was already on since it was wintertime, and I kept everything on during the winter season due to our frequent visits. So all we had to do when we arrived to the house was unpack, take a couple lounge chairs, and walk 20 seconds onto the beach and take a nap. We didn't even check out any of the other rooms because we were so drained. We lounged on the beach until it got really dark. Then my girlfriend tapped my shoulder. I looked up at her, and she asked if I left that light on. I turned to the house and saw one of the upstairs lights on. Not just that, but at one of the windows in that room, there was a shadow outline behind the partially opened curtains. I looked at my girlfriend and she looked at me, and I think it sunk into both of us that someone was in that room at that window. I told her to wait there. I ran to the house as fast as I could. When I got to the back doors, when I started being quiet, I slid it open and shut quietly. And being that I was barefoot made tiptoeing a bit easier. I made it to the stairway and then halfway up the stairs before I heard a door shut upstairs. I went up the remaining stairs a bit quicker now and saw that the door to the room that had the light on was open, but the lights were off now. I went into the room which had the light on not even 2 minutes ago. I kept the light off though. Instead, I just used the flashlight which I had on the shelf ledge upstairs. Then I remembered the closet door. It was shut. That must have been the door I heard close, I figured. I shut off the flashlight as I tiptoed to the door of the closet and slowly put my ear up to it to listen. There was nothing but silence in the room and on the other side of the closet door. I wasn't sure what was going to happen when I opened that door, if someone was in fact on the other side, but I had to confront this. I grabbed the two little knobs and finally brought myself to yank the doors open, but it was empty in there, or at least from what I could tell, it was dark. I grabbed my flashlight and switched it on, and yep, the closet was empty, but a creak in the floorboards outside of the room caught my attention. I ran into the hall expecting to see the intruder, but no, it was just my girlfriend. I got mad at her for coming into the house, even though I told her to stay put. But now that she was there, I told her to help search the upstairs. We looked around in all 3 bedrooms upstairs, all the closets, and the bathroom, but there was no one. Then we checked the downstairs. Every room, every closet. No one. We had to figure that whoever was in the house somehow escaped, so we locked all the doors and looked around the house for any signs of breaking and entering or stolen items. But there was neither of that. So we brushed up and went to bed since we were exhausted. However, that night before we could even fall asleep, there was a click under our bed. I asked my girlfriend if she could hear that. She said yes. I got out from under the bed and got down on my knees. When my face got to the ground level giving me a view under the bed, I could see the intruder laying under our bed. I looked at him face to face before he crawled out and made a break for the front door. I couldn't catch him once he got outside because I was still barefoot. I also didn't get a very good look at his face because we only looked at each other for about a second. We once again searched the whole house to see what he could have stolen, but surprisingly, nothing was stolen. We couldn't even figure out how he broke in. We didn't call the cops. We simply moved on and did our best to enjoy the rest of our vacation. In 2010, I went to a summer camp called Camp Ernst that my parents signed me up for. Thankfully, it was with my best friend Keith, so I wouldn't be going there not knowing anyone. The camp was for 2 weeks, and it was the typical setting you'd expect to see in those old summer camp horror movies like Sleepaway Camp. There were 2 big cabins where the girls and boys slept respectively. There was also a big lodge-type building with an activity center, dining hall, and other amenities, and then various other smaller buildings scattered throughout the camp. Keith and I stayed up later than all the other kids because we wanted to play on our Nintendo DS's together. It was reaching the deep hours of the night, past 2 a.m. We were still playing DS together. That's when the door to the cabin opened. Panicking, we both threw our DS's under the pillows and pretended to be asleep. Footsteps moved around the room, from Keith's bed over to my bed. Then the footsteps stopped at my bed, and for a short moment, I felt the ever so soft feeling of someone breathing down my neck. Then the footsteps moved away from my bed and back to the door, before the door shut. I looked over to Keith and said, "That was scary. Especially since whoever that was breathing down my neck." We went back to playing on our DS's. That's when I got a text message on my phone, which read, "Why are you two still up?" Those of us who had cell phones were given a list of phone numbers of the camp counselors who we should call if something were to happen. But that number didn't belong to any of the counselors. Not that I knew of, at least. I texted back saying, "Who is this?" They never responded, though. I told Keith, who didn't have a cell phone, and he was just as freaked out as I was. Obviously, it had to be a counselor. Or so we thought. So we went back to playing on our DS's with the screen brightness all the way down. We both heard the back door to the cabin open. We looked at each other and once again threw our DS's under the pillows. There were no more footsteps, though. Suddenly my phone vibrated. It was another text message from the same number. It said, "It's Counselor Tony. Come outside to the back of the cabin. I have something to say to you." I told Keith, and he said it sounded way too suspicious. Then we both wondered if whoever this Tony person was the one who just opened the back door. I got off the bed and took a few steps to the center of the room, where I could get a view down the hall to the back door. There was no one in sight, so I walked down the hall a little bit. Keith didn't approve. When I got closer to the back screen door of the cabin, I realized there was a little section of wall that caved in, and in that little opening, there was someone hiding. I got a little closer and realized it was not a camp counselor, but some really old, creepy-looking man who was about the same height as me. I ran back to my bed screaming help, waking everybody up. It was at that moment that I heard the back door slam shut. A camp counselor came rushing inside through the front door, and I told everybody what just happened. The counselors went around the whole campsite, searching the perimeter for anyone matching the description I gave. It was a big place surrounded by forest, though. It would be impossible to find someone. What still doesn't make sense to me is how that man got my phone number. My best guess would be he somehow found a list of phone numbers that the counselors had made, but how did he know who I was? I still dream about this experience every now and then. I was just 13. It was my first and last year at a teenager summer camp, which was basically a traditional summer camp for teens aged 13 to 16. The place had some history, though. An old woman who worked on the grounds died from reasons not disclosed to the public. The old woman was one of the former cafeteria workers, Miss Graham. Well, I'll keep this short. It was one of those nights that my brain just hated me and was basically telling me, "You're not getting any sleep tonight." I was rolling from side to side in an uncomfortable cot as everyone else was fast asleep. The full moon made for a bright night. Beams of light literally poured into the room from every window. I was so far from tired that I just felt defeated. I sat up and rubbed my eyes. and when I opened them again, I noticed the light from the window straight across from me was blocked by something. I gasped when I saw what was blocking the light. It was a person's head. It looked like an older woman with a red cap on. What the hell is this lady doing? I thought to myself. It didn't really hit me hard until I realized the woman was looking right at me, like her eyes were locked onto mine. When I saw this, I flipped on my side and pretended to be asleep, or maybe I just wanted to hide under the covers like a baby. I gave it a minute before I dared look back at the window. She was gone. I breathed a sigh of relief. The room seemed darker now, though. Something wasn't right. I looked up to the window right above my cot, and 3 feet away from me, at most, there was the same older woman in a red cap, looking straight down at me. Once again, I covered myself with the blankets and cowered in fear. I don't know how long I stayed like that before I actually fell asleep, because the next thing I remember is going to one of the adults running the camp and telling them about the woman with the red cap. He looked at the 2 women who were also in his office, and they looked back at him with disturbed faces. One of the women said, "That's so creepy, that sounds exactly like Miss Graham." As she said that, my heart skipped a beat. To this day, I don't know if what I saw at that window was a real person, if it was in my head, or if by some off chance, maybe it was Miss Graham out there. I'll never forget the time I went to a sleepaway camp in Pennsylvania. I was a little kid at the time, and I was very shy. Meeting all the other kids at the orientation on the first day was a scary experience for me. I'd rather be home playing Super Nintendo or something. Some of the other kids made friends pretty quickly. I thought I wasn't going to make any friends, but luckily some really outgoing kids started talking to me early on. I can't for the life of me remember his name though, so I'll call him Mike. Mike was a short blonde kid who always wore a Yankees hat. I thought he was the coolest kid at the time, but looking back now, I realize he's probably one of those kids who turned into a punk troublemaker in high school. During the tour of the campgrounds the first day, Mike and I picked up on a lone bunk building that looked like it had been abandoned and unused for years. We asked one of the counselors what happened. He said he had no idea. It was his first week working there. All he knew was that it hadn't been used for years. On the last night of camp, we were in our bunks. Everyone was getting ready to go to sleep. Mike came up to me and whispered something in my ear. He wanted to sneak over to that abandoned bunk just for the fun of it and see what's inside. I wanted to seem cool to Mike since I, for whatever reason, looked up to him, so I agreed. When everyone was asleep, we went outside and kept close to the bunk. We waited until the lights in the counselors' bunks were out, which wasn't long since it was already late. Then we ran down the pavement leading through the counselors' bunks towards the abandoned bunk building. My heart was racing the whole time. I wasn't built to be doing mischievous things like this, not at that age at least. Mike led the way until we were by the door of the abandoned bunk. The front door was boarded up, which is one of the reasons why it caught our attention initially anyway. So we had to go through one of the windows, which, wouldn't you know it, there was one that was completely busted open already. We climbed into the abandoned bunk. Now these buildings were pretty big. They weren't little shacks like you might be picturing. Each bunk had room for at least 10 campers. This one was no exception. Mike and I stood in the dark bunk. It was kind of cold in there. We had our arms out in front of us to make sure we didn't walk into anything. I walked into a bunk bed numerous times, and I heard Mike doing the same. I stopped to listen to what Mike was doing, and I heard bouncing on one of the beds. "Shh, stop messing around," I told him. I assumed he was hopping up and down on one of the old bunk beds, but Mike's voice came from the complete opposite side of the room. As I remember, he said, "That's not me, I thought that was you." We had nothing to use as a light source, so we were in a pitch black room in a building that hadn't been used for years, and all we heard was the sound of someone bouncing up and down on a squeaky mattress. Needless to say, we freaked out and ran for the window we entered from. It was tiny though, so it took a while to get out. While I was waiting for Mike to get out, the bouncing sound stopped, and there was a loud thump sound. Whoever was bouncing on that bed must have jumped off. I jumped up to the window, and as I crawled through, I felt two hands grab onto my foot and try to pull me back in, but I was already out the window. We ran back to our bunk and locked the door. We contemplated running to the head counselor's bunk to tell them, but we figured we didn't want to get in trouble. Yes, looking back, that was a stupid decision, but we got through the night okay and went home the next day, living to tell the story another day. Two of my closest friends, Trevor and Kevin, always loved to go on late-night adventures. I have so many fond memories going on creepy midnight exploration sessions with them, but I have some not-so-great ones as well. However, the worst experience was the night we went to Joyland Amusement Park in Kansas, an abandoned park surrounded by a somewhat typical suburban area. We lived only 10 minutes away from the park, so we figured it would be our next late-night destination. We always brought our Phoenix flashlights, backpacks, and boots whenever we went to places like this. Today, mostly everything in Joyland Amusement Park has been torn down, but this was back in like 2011 or 2012, and at that time, most of the buildings and rides were still standing. We pulled up on a side road next to the parking lot since it seemed a lot less sketchy than pulling up into the parking lot itself. Then we figured we should just pull up onto the grass next to the woods by the park, because God forbid if a cop would drive down the road. Kevin led the way while Trevor and I followed behind, talking to each other, sometimes joking about how much more eager Kevin was to move ahead than we were. We kept our voices low, however, because we never knew if there might still be security in places like this. All the carnival shacks that once held concessions and games had now been ransacked, trashed with cans and bottles, and sprayed with graffiti. It was basically the scene that you would expect to see in an amusement park that had been abandoned for years. Even though the park was surrounded by suburbs, it was kind of encased in by woods in almost all directions, so instead of late-night traffic, all we heard were crickets and other night creatures. It added to the experience because, to be honest, all three of us in a certain way liked being freaked out. We walked into another carnival game stand. This one with the paintings at top still not completely worn away or graffitied over. It had some smiling cartoon character holding a dart gun, so I'm guessing it was some kind of target hitting game. Now it was just rubble and litter on the ground. Suddenly there was the sound of a glass bottle breaking not too far away. When we turned in that direction, it became clear it definitely came from the bigger looking building. Perplexed and kind of shaken, the three of us went in that direction. We stopped probably 2/3 of the way there when we saw someone standing in the corner of what was once called the Wacky Shack attraction. The person was legitimately just standing facing the corner wall of the entrance. I whispered at my friends to back away slowly. There was clearly something wrong with this person, and we didn't want them to hear us. We backed away, trying to avoid making any noise. It was almost like something out of a cliché horror movie when either Kevin or Trevor stepped on a beer can, which made a really loud crunch. The person standing in the corner turned their head and looked at us, but the speed in which they turned their head was what really scared me. It was almost like a deer. We could now see it was a man. He had a deranged look on his face. The three of us simply walked quickly away. We didn't run because that would only be more cause for this person to chase us. We made it to the woods where we would cut through to get to the car. Halfway there, Kevin looks back and mutters, "Oh shit." We look back and see the guy just standing stiff next to a tree in the distance, a few meters away. Running seemed like our only sensible option at this point. It didn't take long before we were at the car. We screamed at Kevin to unlock it as he fumbled for his keys. As we got into the car and looked out the windows, we could all see him again, this time once again standing stiff like a statue, hunched over by the tree line to the woods. Kevin drove off, and Trevor and I screamed out taunts to the man. That didn't mean we weren't still absolutely shaken permanently. It's scary to think that none of us ever actually saw that weird man move. He seemed to always be standing still whenever we saw him. I was taking my family on a road trip to South Florida. It was a long 2-day drive, and I could tell my kids were getting restless. I saw a sign for an amusement park zoom by on the parkway, so I figured I'd treat my kids and take them to an amusement park for a couple hours. It was late already anyway, so we were just going to stop at the hotel soon. I figured I might as well. My wife and I followed our 2 kids, Tommy, 7, and Trish, 5. They ran ahead of us to find a ride they wanted to go on. I had to admit, this was one pathetic-looking amusement park. There weren't many other people there. There weren't many attractions either. More than half of what appeared to once be attractions and games were now just empty stands and buildings. As long as the kids were happy though, that's all that really mattered. Tommy was running so far ahead, pointing at one of the rides ahead in the dark. I thought for sure he was pointing to the Ferris wheel, but when he made an unexpected turn left and out of sight, my wife and I screamed for him to come back here immediately. When he didn't come back, I told my wife to wait there with Trish while I ran as fast as I could to chase after Tommy. I couldn't find him anywhere though. My heart began to race. The feeling of losing your small child is a painfully scary feeling that will literally make you feel sick inside. I stood in place looking around in a full 360 motion, breathing heavily, afraid someone might have taken my son. I ran to the nearest worker I could find and gave them my son's description. They called on a loudspeaker for Tommy to come to the front entrance. In the meantime, I still ran all over the place searching for him. I stopped dead in my tracks and I felt my heart drop when I found him. He was over by a wall of bushes next to a bathroom building. He was talking to someone who was apparently in the bushes. Then it looked like he was pulled into the bushes. I screamed Tommy's name as I took a break for the bushes. There was nobody around to serve as a witness or come and help me. I got to the bushes and heard Tommy talking to someone. I didn't hear the other person's voice though. I pushed my way through the bushes and saw Tommy being pulled. I didn't see by who though. I ran to him and pulled him, but I felt something else on the other side of another layer of bushes pulling him in that direction. But quickly, whatever it was let go, and I pulled Tommy into my arms. I told him to wait there as I pushed my way through more bushes to a small opening surrounded by trees. There was no one in sight. I had no idea how whoever it was could have gotten away that quickly. I still don't. When I got back to my son, I took him back in public eye of the park and put my hands on his shoulders, shaking him as I was asking him who he was walking with. He said he was following some guy named George. He said George was a lot older than him. I took him back to the front entrance of the amusement park and had him describe George to the workers. They said they'd keep a sharp lookout for him, and we promptly left the park. We went straight to a hotel, and the rest of our trip from there was normal, except for the fact that I couldn't get the incident out of my head. I used to work at a little theme park called Thrillville, USA. No, not the video game. There was an actual amusement park called Thrillville. It was very tiny and secluded though, so don't picture a big place like Six Flags or something in your head. I never enjoyed working there because my shift would always be something different every day, and there was an insane amount of weirdos there. But that's irrelevant. The park closed in 2007, and ever since, I've been from job to job in this shitty country-ass town. One cloudy evening on my own in 2009, I decided it would be fun to go check out what's become of Thrillville, since it had been shut down and abandoned for 2 years at the time. I pulled up to the parking lot, which was of course empty. The grass surrounding the park was now overgrown, and the overgrown grass waved around in the breeze, suggesting an incoming storm. Sneaking in was easy considering it wasn't fenced off or anything, but it was clear some things had already been torn down. Still, at the time, mostly everything was still standing, but it had become so much creepier now. I began to feel tiny rain droplets, but I didn't really care. I was dressed for rain anyway. Walking around the park was creepy, but the first really disturbing thing didn't actually happen until I heard something scutter behind me. To be honest, I couldn't tell if it was a person or an animal, but something was definitely there. I didn't see anything though, so I just pressed onward, choosing to ignore it. I was snapping constant pictures with my Canon camera that I took along because for a few months I was kind of into photography. You know, a passing interest. I snapped away at different buildings, the defunct roller coaster, the big old yellow slide that was now covered in mud stains. Then there were the buildings like the bathrooms, the main office, the varying maintenance shacks. I decided I would start with the bathrooms. I don't know why I thought that would be interesting, but I did. I stepped into the men's side of the bathrooms, which was obviously pitch black inside. The lights no longer worked, so I had to turn on the flash on my camera, kind of like that scene from the first Saw movie. I took a picture of the sink and mirror and checked the image quality. The light flash on my camera was very bright, so pictures in the dark always came out clear. Then I heard the slightest little ting sound. It came from the side of the bathroom with the stalls. I called out, "Is someone in here?" There were 2 stalls from what I remember. I went over to the first stall and pushed the stall door open slowly. I aimed my camera into the stall and took the picture. The light revealed nothing but a toilet in the stall. I moved on to the next stall and pushed the door open. With this one, I was having trouble drawing up the nerve to take the picture. I took about 5 seconds before I pressed the button, and the camera light flashed, and in that brief moment of light, I saw a tall figure looming down at me. I shut the stall door and screamed as I ran back outside to the light and to my car. When I got to my car, I checked the picture I captured in that stall. In the picture was a figure, probably 6'3", standing in front of the toilet, but for some reason the face was blurry. I couldn't see any distinguishing features, but it seemed to be a man. As I browsed through some of the other photos, I picked up on something disturbing. In 4 photos out of 10, I found what appeared to be a person hiding somewhere in the distance, but always seemed to be staring at me. In 2 pictures, the person was in the woods. In 2 others, they were behind buildings or rides. I never sent those pictures from my camera onto my computer, but I think they're still on the camera. I just haven't seen it in years. It might be in my attic. If I find it, I'll post them online, but I quite frankly never want to see that picture again. In the year 2014, I frequently used the app Uber because I wasn't able to drive for 12 months due to some DUI charges. Just a stupid mistake overall. There's this nightclub bar in my town that I would sometimes go to on the weekends with my friends. Sometimes I would get a ride home with a designated driver if we had one, and sometimes we would catch an Uber. This night I wasn't feeling too great, so I left a little early. It was somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning. It was way too cold to walk home, so I called for an Uber. A guy nearby named Alex popped up, and I gotta be honest, he was a little creepy looking. He was older, didn't really smile in his picture, and he had a grayish goatee with a black beanie cap on. He was only 2 miles away, so I didn't really care. It said he had a Chevy Malibu, which sounded nice, so I requested he come pick me up. I waited on the bench outside the club next to the bouncer, who stood still like a statue, hands folded together. About 5 minutes later, a silver 2003 or something Chevy Malibu pulled up in front of the club. I stood up, a bit disappointed it was such an old, ratty looking car. The guy didn't call me over or honk or anything, he just waited by the curb, so I got up and entered the back seat of the car. Right away, things got uncomfortable. He didn't say hello, he didn't shake my hand, he didn't even turn his head to look at me. All he said was in a very quiet voice, "Where are you headed?" To which I replied with my address. We began moving down Main Street, but in the wrong direction of my house. I told him this, and he turned left at the next intersection. Now we were moving away from the main roads and down the quieter residential areas. He didn't put my address into his phone, so I felt really strange. I didn't know if he was expecting me to direct him or not. I ended up putting my address into my own phone so he could listen. When the GPS said turn left down the next street, he completely missed it. I made a confused hand gesture. He noticed it and said, "I just gotta make a quick stop, don't worry, I'll give you a discount." Even though I was drunk, I still knew something bad was going on. Then, that's when I noticed the handgun sticking out from his middle glove box next to him. By now, I was trying to figure out how to get out of this car. At the next red light, I tried the door handle very quietly, but it wouldn't open. I saw that the child lock was on, and from this point forward, my heart was racing. The man was driving us far out of the direction of my house. We must have been 2 towns over by now. I was getting desperate. I couldn't call the cops because I didn't know what this guy might do. I figured my best option would be attempting to flick the child lock switch next to him by the front seats. I had to somehow slide over to the opposite side of the back seat behind him without him noticing. This was one of the most tense moments of my life. I locked my sight on his head through the rearview mirror, making sure he wasn't looking. I very casually slid behind him. Thankfully, he didn't notice. Now came the scariest part. I had to reach for the button up front at the next red light before he could do anything. Each light we passed, I felt more and more tension build up as I was waiting for one of them to turn yellow, and eventually, one finally did. He slowed the car at an intersection that would usually be busy during daylight hours. It was a perfect escape point. The car came to a stop. I knew this light wasn't very long, so I had to be quick. A car was stopped at the opposite side of the intersection, which made me feel a little better. With all of my courage, I reached my hand up to the lit up child lock button, and I must have startled him because he jumped 2 inches out from his seat. He screamed at me, and as I feared he would, he went for the gun right next to him. I was able to open the door and flee to the nearby Cadillac Escalade where I banged on their windows asking for help. They drove off, completely avoiding me, but it didn't matter because the man in his Chevy Malibu was already gone down the block. I ran into a nearby grocery store that was open 24 hours, where I called a taxi this time. This was a very sobering experience because I don't remember being drunk at all in that store or during the taxi ride home. I reported the driver to Uber, who said they would escalate the situation to the authorities. It wasn't until a whole week later that an officer finally showed up at my front door for some questioning, and that was the end of that. I have no idea what became of that guy, but I've never used an Uber since. As a former Uber driver, I've dealt with a whole bunch of unpleasant characters, from the drunken groups of friends on Saturday nights, to the people who pretend to be handicapped to get free rides. But every so often, you may pick up somebody who can just be classified as a straight-up creep. I've picked up a few of these guys, but never one quite as bad as a guy named Tom. It was a Friday night in December, one of the coldest nights of the year. I had nothing to do, so I figured I'd do some late-night pickups. This was 2 years ago. I was 18 and had a new Honda Accord. My parents kinda spoiled me a bit. I was a very skinny 18-year-old though. That's why my dad told me to always keep a blade in my car because you never know what kind of nuts are getting into the car. A guy named Tom popped up a couple miles away by a major shopping area. I responded to his request and started driving in that direction. I pulled up in front of the shopping center where I saw a group of teenagers hanging out. It looked like trouble. I hoped this Tom guy wasn't part of this group. A bunch of them looked at me in my car as I slowly passed. Eventually I just hit the gas and went further into the parking lot of the shopping center, wanting to get away from this group. I did 2 laps around the whole parking lot until I finally noticed through my left mirror somebody approaching my car from behind. I rolled down my window and called out Tom, and he called back yes. I told him to hop in. I had to repeat myself 3 times, and given that all I was saying was hop in very clearly, made the situation very weird from the start. The 4th time, he finally understood me and walked slowly around the back, getting into the seat right behind me. Usually the people I picked up would sit diagonally from me, which is what I preferred. When people sat right behind me, it just made me a little paranoid sometimes, especially when the person seemed kinda creepy. This guy was old, he had to be in his upper 40s. "Where to?" I asked him. He told me an address, which I entered into my phone. By his voice, I could tell he was a very heavy smoker. Come to think of it, my car was starting to smell like cigarettes too. The address he gave me was 10 miles away, which was fine, since it meant I'd be making more money. I tried making small talk initially, which didn't work out too well. Like if I would ask him a yes or no question, sometimes he would just mumble, and any other questions led to dry responses. I stopped talking when he completely ignored one of my questions. That was within just 5 miles. There was still 5 to go. By the 6-mile mark, things started getting uneasy in there. I was afraid to look into the rearview mirror because I was so sure that he was staring at me. I took a quick half-second glance and saw I was right. He was in fact staring at me. My body forced my foot down heavier on the gas. I wanted this ride to be over sooner. By the 8-mile mark, I started to realize we were in the middle of nowhere. We were on basically a deserted street with woods on either side and occasional buildings. I was growing suspicious now as to where this address he told me actually was. So, while driving, I dragged my finger across my phone to slide the map in the direction of the address. It seemed to lead to a dead-end street with no surrounding streets nearby. I was getting more and more nervous with each passing minute now. I shot a glance back up again at the mirror, and he was still watching me. I finally summed up the courage to ask him if the address he gave me was of his house. There was silence for a few moments, and I thought he was once again going to ignore me, or possibly didn't hear me. But 5 seconds later, he finally answered yes. There was less than a mile left in the drive now, still surrounded by nothing but woods with the occasional empty-looking building. I was approaching the dead-end street that the address he gave me resided on, hoping some houses would come into sight. As the street came up, I slowed down so I could get a good look of it. But nothing could be seen. Just pitch blackness. I could only imagine why he wanted to get me out here alone, so far away from anybody or anything. I casually kept driving, pretending like I missed it, hoping he wouldn't notice. But he did. Instantly, he hopped out of his seat and yelled at me to turn around. Honestly, I felt like my life was on the line, so I apologized and did a quick 3-point turn. As I was reapproaching the dead-end street, I dug my hands into the netting compartment on the side of my seat where I kept my blade. I very quietly flicked the blade open and held it tight in my right hand, ready to use it. I turned down the dead-end road, with my headlights now displaying just what I thought I would see. Nothing but trees on either side. I made it to the end of the road, not a single house or building on the road. I just knew something was about to go down. I was just trying to physically and mentally prepare myself for it. Suddenly, he said in as soft as a voice as he probably could, "Thanks for the ride." I wasn't even thinking about money at this point. He opened his door, but before stepping out, he said, "Could you get out of the car for a second? I need help carrying my bag. I have a bad back." But he didn't have a bag. I knew he didn't. He didn't come in with one. I replied, Yeah, sure, let yourself out and I'll help you in a sec." The shakiness in my voice was too obvious. What happened next, I never imagined would have happened. All of a sudden, I felt pressure on my neck. It took me at least a second before I could realize he was choking me from the back seat. Immediately, I drilled the blade into his left arm and he screamed in pain, releasing his grip on my neck. He fell out of the car and onto the street, and I took that opportunity to turn the car around and practically floor it down the street until I returned to a busy road. I actually didn't end up calling the cops. I was just too scared to do anything but drive home. And by the time I got home, I just wanted to go to sleep and forget about it. Needless to say, I resigned from my Uber driving days after this incident. partner and I got a breaking and entering call late one Friday night. I'd never responded to a call like that before, but it sounded serious. A young woman was home alone and heard footsteps downstairs, but when she was on the 911 call, the call was cut before she could give her location in the house. We arrived to the home and entered through the front door, which was left unlocked, which later proved to be how the break-in occurred. Both of us shouted police with our guns drawn, expecting the suspect to be armed. We called out for Anna, that was the homeowner's name. Anna never called back to us. We knew she must have been scared and didn't want to give away her position to the intruder. We checked the whole first floor, which was small and quick. There didn't appear to be a basement. A door shutting upstairs drew my partner and I's attention. I led the way upstairs. All the doors had been shut, so I couldn't really tell which door I had just heard. I told my partner to check that one while I checked this one. I turned the doorknob and kicked the door open, immediately lifting my gun into the air. It was a dark, empty room. I heard breathing in this room, though. It sounded like a woman's breathing. I looked at the closet door, which was slid slightly open, and I saw half a face, mostly someone's eye, peeking through the opening. Resting assured it was Anna, I lowered my gun and said, "Anna, it's okay, you can come out." But she didn't, and the breathing quieted. Then my partner in the next room over called, "Jason, I found her." My feeling in that room suddenly went from at ease to ready to throw up. I raised my gun again and yelled, "Come out of the closet." They did not obey, so I called my partner into the room. He turned on the light and we opened the closet together to see this disheveled, drugged-out woman holding one of Anna's kitchen knives. With 2 guns pointed at her, she dropped the knife and we brought her into the precinct. Thank God I was stationed in a safer area of town the next year, and I haven't gotten any breaking and entering calls since then. As a state trooper for 15 years, I've experienced my share of close calls and uncomfortable situations. This happened over a decade ago when I was still relatively new to the job. I was on night patrol on an interstate about 2:30 a.m. I usually had my car parked near a bush to hide myself from view from oncoming speeding cars, but at this hour I didn't really try to hide too much. I was moving my car and pulled into a gas station that sat on the side of the interstate. It was closed, not because it was late, but rather it was temporarily out of service. I noticed 2 cars parked in the lot next to each other. There was nothing immediately suspicious about this, but I kept my eye out just because strange things happen at this hour. I parked my car in a way that I could watch the interstate as well as these 2 parked cars. I realized that I didn't see anyone in either of those cars though. Now this was quite suspicious. The station was closed and there were no workers here. I exited my car with my hands on my belt and approached the 2 cars. I tapped on the windows for the both of them. Nobody in either of them, as I suspected. I began to walk around the lot as the occasional car zipped down the interstate. I went up to the glass of the closed gas station and knocked on it. I turned around, dumbfounded. Whose cars were these? Just as I imagined they could be in the woods somewhere, I heard someone running from around the building and ask for my help. He was some young 20-something-year-old man, like me at the time. He said his car wouldn't start and needed help. Now, I told him right away that I was no mechanic and that he'd need to call a towing company, but he practically begged me to just check under the hood for a second. He ran to his driver's side and popped the hood. I looked under the hood with him, not really knowing what to look for because I wasn't much of a car guy at the time. I asked if his battery died, and when I looked at him, I took note that he was looking around very oddly. He replied, "I don't think so." I then looked at the car parked next to him. "Whose car is that?" I asked him. He said he didn't know. He simply parked there to see if there was a porta potty in the back or something. I was reading through this kid's bullshit. Something was up here. As I looked back at the guy from the 2 cars, I saw him looking back at something or someone. I turned and saw another guy approaching me with a knife in his hand. I unholstered my gun and aimed it at him. He dropped the knife and put his hands up. They both did. I immediately called for backup while keeping the 2 at gunpoint. I cuffed the one who was holding the knife and placed him in the back of my car, and then grabbed the second pair from my glove box and cuffed the second guy. When backup arrived, I went to the back of the gas station where the first guy had originally approached me from. what I found there still holds up to be the most disturbing thing I'd ever seen in all of my years as a trooper. There were 2 fresh, dead bodies wrapped in garbage bags, cut up in 2 pieces each to fit in the bags. Along with them was also a shovel sitting on the concrete by the woods. The 2 were planning on burying the bodies somewhere in the woods off the interstate, and it seemed they were in a hurry. These 2 were a couple of the dumbest people I had ever interacted with, being that out of anywhere in the state, they chose to bury 2 bodies off an interstate behind a gas station. Going to sleep at night knowing you almost had your throat slit by somebody on the job messes with you, and I didn't get much sleep for a while. I'm a rookie cop currently working the night shift. I'm just a normal patrol officer conducting traffic stops and responding to basic 911 calls. 2 nights in a row last week, I was called to the same house. Dispatch had called me to check out the house as someone had dialed 911 and hung up. The house was a couple miles from me, in my patrol zone. I arrived to the house quickly and turned up the dirt driveway through the trees onto the property. The house was dark, no lights on, no cars, nothing. I parked my squad car on the far right side of the property and went to the front door, taking note that all the windows were properly shut. I knocked on the door and no answer. The door was also locked. For my immediate guess, the place was abandoned, for years by the looks of it. I called to dispatch that the place was abandoned and nobody was there. Then I left. The next night I was working the same shift, and around a similar time, I got a call from dispatch that there was another 911 call from the same house. Only this time, someone could be heard crying on the other end before the call ended. I was asked to check out the house again. This time I was a little further away, but still the drive wasn't too bad. I pulled up the dirt driveway again onto the property, and again, no lights, no cars. I approached the front door again, and this time it was left cracked open. I knocked on the door while holding the doorknob to prevent the door from pushing open. No answer. I called to dispatch that I would be entering the house, which I was cleared to do since the crying over the line implied an urgent situation inside the house. I drew my gun and entered the house. I tried to find a light switch without luck. I had my gun in one hand and now my flashlight in the other. The house was mostly silent, besides the sound coming from behind a closed door. It was the basement door. I called to dispatch for backup in a whisper. The sound coming from down in that basement was a tone, like a dial tone of a phone. I started walking down the stairs as quietly as possible. I got to the bottom and followed the noise of the dial tone to an old, early 2000 style landline speakerphone. The phone was off the hook, and it was playing the dial tone on speakerphone. I put the phone on the hook to silence the noise. It was almost as if it were planned to happen like this. As soon as the phone hit the hook, I heard a muzzled laughing type noise in a far corner of the basement. I turned around and there was some guy standing opposite me in the basement, with his hand over his mouth, and he appeared to be laughing. But it wasn't this genuine laugh, it was more like a sickly, mentally unstable laugh. The guy was holding something in his other hand. I couldn't see what it was at first, but when he raised his hand up to his head, I realized he was holding a revolver. I aimed my gun at him and yelled to drop the weapon. He paused as he had his revolver to his head, apparently about to pull the trigger. So I shot him in the arm twice, causing him to drop the gun. He screamed in pain as I cuffed him and brought him upstairs. I requested a medical team at once. A second squad car pulled up, as did an ambulance a few minutes later. The scariest part about this for me was not that I had to shoot a man in the arm twice, but that I was mere seconds away from seeing a man spray his brains out onto the wall. My partner and I got a radio call of a welfare check, which is just a check on the welfare of a person. A woman's ex-boyfriend called because he received text from his ex stating that she wished it had never ended and that she could no longer go on without him. We get to the place, knock, pound, etc. No answer. We call the number the ex provided and get an answer and a hang-up, so we hear it from the outside window and know she's in there. We say we're going to break the door down if she doesn't answer. We hear some slurred mess of speech. Door unlocks but doesn't open. We open the door to find a young woman, wet, naked, pale as hell, and swaying in one spot. Her hands bleeding. We call a rescue ambulance, and she's off to the hospital. Now to the creepy part. None of the lights would turn on, so we conduct a safety search and find candles lit in the bedroom and bathroom. On the walls were Bible scriptures written in her blood and a tub of brown water, the water being mixed with old blood. I don't know how she survived because that water was dark. She had been sitting in it for approximately 3 to 4 hours. Before getting transferred to a different county, I used to work as a police officer in Burlington, New Jersey. Burlington is not a safe place. They say that crime there is 88% higher than the rest of Jersey. And having worked there for a year, I got to learn that firsthand. Now there would be a lot of break-ins, robberies, assaults, and after a while you'd get used to those calls. Sometimes you'd get pretty strange, unsettling calls though. This was one of them. Most Burlington locals are familiar with the McNeil Mansion, a long abandoned mansion that sits right on the Delaware River. The home was constructed in 1894 to serve as a residence for Andrew H. McNeil, as well as his wife and 4 daughters. The house had been abandoned and left to decay since 1974 and is now owned by the county. Sometimes there would be kids trespassing on the property to check it out. Sometime past midnight, I was told over the radio by dispatch to investigate the property, as there was a report by a neighboring house that there were some people seen hopping the fence to the property. Upon entering the property, I noticed a light coming from inside one of the upstairs windows. Part of me inside died a little as I realized someone was in there and that it was my job to go in and get them out. I requested backup into my radio and stated I would be entering the mansion to pursue a trespasser. I scanned the outside of the house once more looking for an entry point, and found one of the lower windows was smashed open and easily accessible, and that's how I made my way in. Right away, first thing I did was make my presence as a police officer known. I was inside what appeared to once be the living room of the mansion, rubble covering the whole floor. I heard footsteps upstairs. I shouted again, expecting them to come down the stairs. When they didn't, that meant it was my job to come up. I went up the stairway and started walking around. There was no way to hide my steps with all the litter and rubble on the ground. I heard something fall in a nearby room. This is when the worry and fear really started to kick in. At this point, I had my hand on my gun holster ready to react. Though let me tell you, having a gun doesn't make you feel invincible. I shouted again to try and draw out the trespassers from the room. You ever hear that dumb, overused quote, "I didn't sign up for this" in the movies? Well, I was pretty much feeling that exact way. I stepped into the room that I thought was where the noise had echoed from. It was some small, weird room with a bunch of windows with blurred glass film. There was a sliding closet door open about 3/4, so they had to be in there. I took out my pepper spray and gave one more warning that I was a police officer before yanking the closet open fully. It was empty. This made no sense. I looked around the room, and the windows. They looked to an outside deck, and there was someone standing behind one of them. I couldn't see anything about their features other than the outline of their body, but then I realized there were people at the other windows too. The way they were all looking at me through the window film, such a ghostly appearance they gave, like a picture from a kid's horror novel. I found the door to that deck in an adjacent room. When I stepped out, the 3 figures standing at the windows were gone. I didn't see any other way off the deck besides the door I came out through. I saw the flashing lights of a police car through a bunch of trees, parked on the same lot as me. Another officer announced his and his partner's arrival to me over the radio. I met the officers outside the house and pointed up at the deck where I saw 3 people standing. They were creeped out as well when I described how they all just stood there at their own windows looking in. We searched the whole mansion together. I eventually came to a small room with a window on the first floor, and once again, something was outside this window. I had to step closer to figure out if it was a person's head or not. When I got too close, the object lowered below the window. I radioed the other officers to go outside with me. We looked around the whole property and didn't find anyone. We searched for another 10-15 minutes before closing up all the entrances to the house and moving on. The scariest part of this for me was definitely seeing 3 ghost-like silhouettes all standing at their own of the 3 windows to that deck, looking inside at me.
Number 4. This happened during a Boy Scout campout when I was 15. My friend, who was supposed to share the tent with me, called out from the trip at the last minute, so that meant I had to pitch the tent and sleep in it alone. The sun was going down, and after a long day of hiking, we got back to camp to set up our tents. It was already dark at that point, and I was still trying to set it up. It wasn't as easy doing it yourself. Someone came over and finally helped me, and then we ate dinner. After the cliched telling of scary stories around the campfire, we all went to sleep. I guess I was a little happy that I had my own tent at that point, since I had more room. I fell asleep quickly, but woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of somebody stomping around my tent. I immediately assumed it was another scout going to take a leak or something. You may be thinking that all our tents were pitched right next to each other, but our scoutmasters actually had us pitch our tents far apart, so I was pretty far from my closest scoutmates. The stomping around the tent seemed to just be going around in a circle, so at that point, I was sure somebody was messing with me. I asked who it was, and in response to that, they stomped off into the woods. I almost found myself going out and following them, but I figured it wasn't worth it, and just tried to fall back asleep. But after that, it was hard to. Sure enough, the stomping came back, and started circling the tent again. I was pissed off now, so I got up and unzipped the door to the tent. I was expecting to see another scout, but when I confronted the person making the noise, instead I saw a grown man, probably 6'5", in his mid-30s. My heart was racing and I couldn't even gather up the courage to scream. The man gave me a creepy smile, and then brought his finger to his lips, signaling for me to be quiet. I did a quick 180 and sprinted to my scoutmaster's tent, screaming like a baby. He ran out before I even reached the tent, and I told him about the man I saw. He and the other scoutmaster ran over to my tent with one of the hunting rifles, but they didn't find the man. They did, however, pick up on the tracks the man left walking around the tent. We were all told to bring our tents closer together, like literally right on top of each other. The trip was cut short the next day and we all went home. I have never gone camping since, and I never will again. Number 3. So me and a couple of my buddies went camping last summer alongside the Willamette River. We actually had a decent hike into the deep end of woods. We did some night fishing, listening to music, and basically drank to the point where everything was funny later in the night. I would guess we finally called it a night somewhere past 2 a.m. I shared a tent with one of my buds, while the other 2 shared another tent. We heard them laughing about something. At first we laughed at the sound of their laughing, but it soon got annoying and we yelled for them to shut up. One of them responded, "It isn't us." I sat up, startled at the response. I came to realize that it was the sound of only one person laughing, and it didn't sound like either one of my friends. Even in my drunk state, I realized how odd it was for somebody to be out this far in the woods so late at night. The laughing gradually got closer and louder to our campout. My friend shot up and looked at me with a worried look on his face. I heard my other friends scream over to us that they were getting freaked out. As the laughing got even closer, I could make it out very clearly to be the laugh of a male, probably in his 30s or 40s. He sounded like he was as drunk as us, messing around with friends, but we only heard his laugh, nobody else. There was something indescribably creepy about his laugh too, as if it was missing something to it. You had to be there to understand what I mean. The laughing was now just at the edge of our campsite. But we couldn't hear any footsteps at all. Now that may not seem like a big deal. It was impossible to move through that without making noise. And finally, all of a sudden, the laughing stopped completely. We had no idea where whoever that was standing, as he hadn't made a single stepping sound. We sat there in silence looking at each other. My friend was clearly freaking out, but he was keeping it together the best he could. Finally, something broke the silence. The sound of something rubbing against the cottony fabric of the tent. We saw the outline of a hand through the moonlight, pressing on the tent. We both screamed at the top of our lungs before getting out of the tent. We ran as fast as we could through the woods, our other friends following us. After about 5 minutes of running, we somehow found our car. I actually puked from running so much before taking the wheel. I don't condone drinking and driving, but I still believe we were just in this situation. By far the most horrific experience of my life. No idea who or what the hell that was, or what they wanted. Number 2. After college, I went backpacking in the Canadian wilderness for a few weeks by myself. To put this in perspective, I was in the middle of nowhere. The nearest town was a 3-hour bus ride away, and I only saw one other person, who was from a distance. He was in a canoe, during the entire 7 days. I brought a few disposable cameras with me, as this was before digital cameras were too widespread. I took a lot of pictures. When I got home, I had them developed and took a look at them. The pictures were standard nature shots, until I got about halfway through my first camera. There were 2 pictures of me asleep in my tent in my sleeping bag. I literally freaked out when I saw it, and I had a complete breakdown. To this day, I have no idea how those pictures got taken. I haven't been camping since, and I sleep with my door open and my curtains shut, and I still get the paranoid feeling that whoever took those pictures is still watching me somehow. Number 1. My boyfriend and I decided to go out to the gorge for some quality time camping. We had always gone with several other people, but this was the first time it was just us two. When we got out of our car to prep our gear for the mile hike back to the camping spot, 2 sketchy looking dudes came out of the trailhead, eyed us, and went back onto their old school Volkswagen camper van. I had a weird feeling but shrugged it off and proceeded back to our camping spot. I had previously camped in the same area a handful of times, and I knew it pretty well. Once we got back there, I knew of a handful of different camping spots and proceeded to check them all out for the one that would be ideal for us. I noticed what looked like someone camping further up the hill, so I picked a spot a little further down where we'd most likely be out of sight. Not out of earshot though, as I heard him yelling with someone else back over on the trail. It was starting to get dark by the time we got everything set up, so I figured I'd start looking for firewood. Suddenly, this guy appears out of nowhere and asks us if we'd like any help, and offered to sell us a bundle of firewood for $10. I laughed because we were in the woods, thus surrounded by wood, which I could pick up off the ground for free. He then said that I wouldn't find much because they'd already cleared it out over the past few weeks. Few weeks? I asked him how long he'd been camping up there, and he said almost a month. I already had the creeps about him, and he claimed he was up there by himself. I asked him why I heard him yelling with someone then, and that he had referred to more people when he was talking about the wood. He stammered and was like, yeah, there's some dudes I know camping over there up on the other side of the river. Then he proceeds to tell us that he's been lonely since he arrived. He was from Pennsylvania, took a bus to Lexington, and had been living in the woods back behind where I currently work. I knew exactly where he was talking about, because I saw some homeless people, immigrants, and drug addicts coming in and out of those woods every day. So basically he was a homeless man who somehow got a ride out to the gorge and decided he would just live there instead. He had been living on snakes, bugs, and selling firewood for money. But he said we were the first people he'd seen in a few weeks. His stories were all over the place, and I knew he was lying about a lot of what he told us. He wasn't alone even if he claimed to be. He even took us to his camp where there were tons of stuff for several guys, not just one. He said he liked camping up top where he could see everything, and everyone. Then showed up our campsite. He had a straight shot view. By now it was dark and he helped us get a fire going. I was trying to politely get him on his way back up the hill so I could have a minute to process all of this. When he left, I started whispering to my boyfriend that there was no way in hell I could sleep with that lying, sketchy homeless creep right up the hill. We didn't have a gun, knife, or even a dog to protect ourselves if we needed to. My boyfriend somehow convinced me to stay a little longer, so we planned to stay the night. But all throughout the night, we heard twigs and branches snapping around our tarp, as if somebody was watching us. It was that man. I knew it was. He was standing out there, watching us. I said let's quietly get our shit together and get the hell out of there. Which we did, only we left our new tarp set up because they would make too much noise and he'd know we were leaving. As soon as I stood up with my pack, ready to get the hell out of there, he yells, "Leaving so soon?" We proceeded to get away from there as quickly as possible. The most disturbing thing, as we were getting away from there, the man yelled for us to come back. That only made us go even faster. In my mind, we were either getting robbed, raped, killed, or something, because he was not alone. His stories didn't add up, and his background of where he came from made me believe he was running from something and was trying to hide by living off the grid. I called the Rangers the next morning and told them about him. Luckily, all he got from us was a set of new tarps.
My friend Carlos and I would always go out shoveling people's sidewalks after big snowstorms to make some quick cash. In like 2013 or 2014, our town was in the midst of a blizzard. It was dark, windy, and snow was building up fast. Our school already announced it would be closed due to snow the next day. So with nothing to do that night, and it being only like 8 p.m., we went out with our shovels and started ringing doorbells offering to shovel sidewalks for cash. We got a lot of no's before we got our first yes. We made around $15 each on our first house. We made our way across the neighborhood. A lot of people weren't interested, and most people just wouldn't open their doors. We got a second house eventually, and made a little more money on that one. Then I remember a long gap between that house and the next house that would say yes. It was a small corner house, but usually corner houses would pay more. We rang the bell, and the door cracked open, but whoever was on the other side didn't show their face. They did, however, speak from the other side. A deep man's voice said, "Who's there?" I pitched our snow shoveling service to the man on the other side, requesting $40 in return since it was a corner house. There was a short silence. Then the voice on the other side said, "Oh yes, please, $40 is fine." There was a hint of nervousness in the voice. I said all right, and then the door shut. I didn't see the man's face at all. I turned to Carlos and said that was weird, but we started the shoveling. I started from the front porch down the walkway to the driveway. Carlos worked on the sidewalks. I couldn't help but stare at the house every once in a while, and at one point when I turned to a window as I was throwing the snow from my shovel onto the ground, I saw who I assumed to be the homeowner. He was standing at one of the windows watching me. Could I see anything of his face? Not really. He was standing in a dark room. A little uncomfortable it made me, but I tried my best to ignore it and continue shoveling. Of course, I'd occasionally glance back and he would still be there. Eventually I finished the driveway, just around the same time Carlos finished the sidewalks. So we started our way back up the walkway to the front stoop. But before getting to the stoop, the door opened and the man inside shouted, "Go around back." Carlos and I froze, looked at each other, then obeyed his command. We stepped through the snow-covered grass to the backyard gate. I opened it and pushed it through the rising snow, which was slightly difficult. Then, there we were, in the man's backyard, which had a small awning that we stayed under to get out from the falling snow. We waited by the back door, expecting him to come outside eventually with our money. We waited for over a minute and started getting antsy. I started pounding on the back door since there didn't seem to be a doorbell. Then there was the sound of a window being rotated open, followed by the man's voice again, saying, "Come inside." Carlos and I looked at each other again, and then I led the way in through the back door. All the lights in this house were turned off. It was actually so hard to see anything, really. "Hello?" I said. I heard a man's voice from another room call, "I'm counting your money on the table." It seemed he was inside the kitchen, which was connected by a small door through the room we entered from. We walked closer to the kitchen, which appeared to be lit up through the window only by the streetlight standing on the side of the house. I stood at the doorway, intending on looking through the crack of the door to see where the guy was standing in the kitchen, but I couldn't see through the crack because it was blocked by him. The man was standing on the other side of the door, looking through the crack. I turned and pretended I didn't see him. I made up some bull, like telling Carlos we forgot something outside. We left the house, and the man didn't say a word. As soon as we got outside, we grabbed our shovels and sprinted away from there. All of our hard work shoveling that house was for nothing. We got back to my backyard, put the shovels away, and went inside to warm up and rest for a little bit. Carlos and I chilled for a little bit, then it was time for him to go. He went out the back to get his shovel, but he came back inside, concerned, telling me to come take a look at something. There was an extra, fresh set of boot marks in the snow. You may ask how we knew. That's because one set trailed from the gate to the back door to the shed in the corner of our backyard. Carlos hurried back inside, and we told my mom. We live in a very poor, relatively unsafe neighborhood, so my mom was quick to believe us and get 911 on the phone. Police showed up relatively quickly considering the horrible driving conditions, and they went to investigate the shed. Carlos, my mom, and I watched through the back window as the police pulled out a man from the shed. He had a matching shirt from what I could see through the window back when we were shoveling that property. It was undoubtedly the house owner. He later admitted to police that he was going to attempt to break into the house when we all went to sleep. Why, however, he never answered. Police also said he was very intoxicated when he admitted this, which made me think, what on earth was he going to do to us in that kitchen if we didn't leave his house? It was an early December night, and we were having our first snowstorm of the year. I was in my bed watching some low-budget Christmas film while texting various friends, mostly my friends George and Pat. We used to text in a 3-person group chat. Everything was as it should be when I felt my heart drop to my stomach as a bang came from the window right next to my bed. I opened the curtain, but there was no one standing out there. Then, pow, there was another, as I was still looking out the window. It was a snowball. Someone was throwing snowballs at my window. I stood on my bed to get the best possible view out the window, but I didn't see anyone standing out there in the snow. So I actually lifted open my window to call out. It was almost immediately after I shouted out the window that I heard someone's laughter. Not a child's laughter like I was expecting it to be. It was a deeper voice, could belong to anyone from the age of 17 to 40 for all I knew. I shut the window and started texting in our little group chat saying I knew it was one of them messing with me. The fact that they now weren't responding made me even more confident. I didn't close the curtain as I knew whichever one of them it was, they weren't done messing with me. And just like that, another snowball hit my window. I lifted the window up quickly to try and catch them, and there he was standing in the snow, waving to me. But it wasn't either of my friends. It was some guy in a black beanie and black coat with gloves on, laughing. He started approaching the window. I hurried and slammed it shut and twisted the little lock. I also closed the curtain so that he couldn't look into my room. Both of my friends had texted back by now with question mark responses. Then there was a single knock at my window, and it started being fiddled with and shaken. He was trying to lift it open. When it all stopped, I waited a couple minutes before peeking through the curtain. It seemed the coast was clear, so I finally went to go tell my mom and dad about the whole thing, who came to have a look out my window. Sure, my dad believed me, he literally saw the footprints in the snow, but he just didn't see it necessary to call the police, figuring whoever was out there gave up. My dad turned on all the outside lights just as a deterrent, and then they went to sleep. I stayed up in my room with the lights off, continuing to watch movies. My door clicked open. I said get out, assuming it was my little brother. The door shut, so it seemed he listened to me. Silence, except for the TV. I watched for a long while, then a click in my wood floor. I turned, halfway through repeating "get out" in a louder voice, when realizing it was not my short little brother. It was that tall man in the black beanie and coat from outside. He started waving to me again at the doorway, then put his pointer finger up to his lips. He started walking over to my bed, and that's when I got up, ready to defend myself. He approached faster now, easily grabbed me, and covered my mouth with his leather gloves. There was a wet white towel in his glove that he was pressing to my face for a long time. I tried to break free and scream, but I couldn't, and that was the last thing I remember before everything went black. I woke up in my living room with my parents and police hovering over me. An ambulance arrived shortly. My dad heard the commotion going on in my room and came to find the man over me. My dad, much larger than that man, managed to overpower him, but not long enough before the police could arrive. He ran out the front door and disappeared. I was quickly brought to the hospital. Thankfully, I was all right. If you're wondering, the man climbed in through our downstairs window. It's a little-known common courtesy out in the mountains during a snowstorm that if someone's seeking shelter in your cabin, you let them in. No, I wasn't the one offering that courtesy to someone else in the story. I was the one seeking refuge. It was supposed to be a long weekend of hunting, but what started as a cold, sunny day quickly formed tons of dark storm clouds, and I quickly found myself right in the middle of a blizzard. After a full, rather unsuccessful day of hunting hares, I was way too far and disoriented to make my way back to my cabin. I had to seek refuge somewhere else. I came across a log cabin nestled between a circle of trees. No lights on, but I still had to try the door. I hit the door with my fist a few times. No answer, but I could hear footsteps on the other side, approaching the door. I expected it to open, but it didn't. I shouted that I'm lost and need shelter. The door cracked open, and I heard a voice say, "Come in, leave your boots by the door." I waited a bit, expecting him to open the door fully and formally greet me as anyone would, but that didn't happen, so I pushed the door open myself and entered the dark cabin. The room was lit by 2 candles, just enough for me to see the couch that the man then told me to sleep on. As for the man, all I saw was his silhouette on the far side of the room. The little light from the candles didn't extend that far. I dropped my bag and gun on the floor and laid down on the couch. I thanked the man for letting me crash here till the storm blows over. He didn't answer. His behavior wasn't the most bizarre thing. Folks are strange up in the mountains. If he wasn't up for conversation, I'd just get some early shut-eye. I closed my eyes, though the level of darkness with my eyes closed wasn't much of a difference. I was subconsciously waiting to hear the man's footsteps leave the room, but they never did. I opened my eyes, and his silhouette was still in the corner of the room, just standing there. I felt the need to say, "Yeah, I think I'm just gonna get some sleep now, thanks." No response. I turned to my other side so that I wouldn't be tempted to just keep opening my eyes to check on him. Some time passed, but without having heard his footsteps walk away, the curiosity was eating away at me. I turned over to look again, and this time, I swear to God, the silhouette of the man was closer by at least a few feet. I couldn't make out his face, but the slight glow from the candles would just barely trickle around the man's forehead, and what I saw was disgustingly pale skin. I quickly gathered my belongings and thanked him, but I said I had to go. I didn't look at him anymore, because I don't think I wanted to know what he looked like. I put my boots on outside and hurried back into the blizzard. I came across another cabin down the hill, this one with the lights on. I knocked on the door, and some old man and his wife answered the door. They welcomed me in immediately and were very inviting. They gave me some hot tea and offered me a spot on the couch. I told them my story about the freaky cabin up the hill, and the two looked at each other, puzzled. The woman confirmed 2 times the cabin I was talking about. Then she said, "Honey, the owner of that cabin was murdered 2 years ago. That cabin has been vacant ever since."